So you'll see the notice, the recording and transcription has started. We transcribe the meetings. That helps with the meeting minutes to make sure that Josh can get things as accurate as possible. So with that, Bob, are we ready to start?
Yes, I think we have critical mass. So let's go ahead. I guess the first thing is Stan Branch, if he's here, or Gary.
This is Stan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. So good afternoon and welcome to the February 2022 Hanford Advisory Board Tank Waste Committee meeting. My name is Stan Branch. I am the Deputy Designated Federal Officer for the Hanford site. As a reminder, this meeting will be conducted in accordance with the requirements of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Advisory committees have played an important role in shaping programs and policies of the federal government. The Hanford Advisory Board role provides policy-level advice and recommendations concerning the following EM-specific issues such as cleanup activities and environmental restoration, waste and nuclear materials management and disposition, excess facilities, future land use and long-term stewardship, risk management, and communications. I appreciate your attendance today and look forward to the Hanford Advisory Board Tank Waste Committee development and submission of constructive, actionable policy-level advice on the Hanford cleanup. Again, welcome and thank you for your attendance today. Back to you, Bob.
Thank you. I guess next on the agenda is the approval of our meeting minutes. Let's see, it is for, got the title? I didn't. Oh.
Yeah, it's a little today. Here we go.
Yeah, so it's the November 17th, 2021 meeting minutes. Have we got any updates or requests for changes to this, Ruth or Josh?
I don't have any. Josh, did you get any?
No, I did not.
So unless there are other changes, if you would indicate and we will discuss those. Otherwise, can we consider the meeting minutes approved? Any comment? Okay. So I wanted to go over the agenda real quickly. This is kind of an abbreviated meeting because some of our presentations didn't happen. But the key thing that we need to do today are to review two pieces of advice. One of them is from the Cleanup Priorities Group, and Chris Sutton will be taking us through that. Tom Galliano has met with all the other committees that have committee meetings this week, and we'll be looking at primarily the tank waste and the general sections. And then this afternoon, and this is a very important piece, is we're going to go over the next version and hopefully the final version of the advice on the single shell tank leaks. It's been worked several times, and hopefully we'll have some people from ecology and hopefully DOE that will be able to tell us what activities that they're doing in their negotiations on this issue. So we want to make sure our advice supports that. And then we have a briefing by Gary on the membership packet, and then committee business where we're going to try to put together a plan for going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ruth.
Right. So Early in the year, January, February, March, is typically the time that HAB committees elect their chair and vice chair for the calendar year. So leadership of HAB committees currently runs calendar year. The Public Involvement Committee chose to delay its elections to probably its April meeting. The RAP committee had elections yesterday, and Cecilia was elected chair, Jan Kittrell vice chair. So on the agenda is nominations for chair and vice chair. You have the option of electing those positions today or doing like pick and delaying it until your next meeting. I do not have any nominations for chair or vice chair for this committee. So the question is, do you want to take nominations today, or do you want to elect, or do you want to put it off until April? This is the boss the facilitator around part of the meeting. Don't everybody speak at once.
I think it'd be good if we got nominations today, and then we can see, depending on who was nominated, if we could go ahead with an election or if people want to think about it a little bit more. But I think it'd be a good idea to at least have some names this morning.
And I will ask anybody nominated if they are willing to serve. We don't voluntold people. They can volunteer. Susan.
Okay, had to unmute. Hard to believe I had trouble unmuting. I agree with Bob. I think we should take nominations today, and frankly, I think we should vote today. We don't have that many meetings. It's, I say we take action and move forward, a step forward. Thanks. And I nominate Bob for chair.
Bob, are you willing to serve?
Yes, I'm willing to continue, only if Susan is willing to continue as my vice chair.
Sure. But if somebody else, I would be glad to. And thank you. It's an honor. If someone else would like to be nominated, absolutely, I'd support whatever the committee feels.
Are there other nominations for chair or vice chair? Anyone? Okay. Anyone on the phone? I can't tell. We've got 4 people on the phone, and if you raise your hand, I can't see you on the phone. You're gonna have to speak up. All right. We have 1 nomination for chair and 1 nomination for vice chair. The way we did this yesterday with RAP, they had 1 nomination for each position, was folks sent me an email and told me yes or no, and then I announced it after lunch. So in person, we'd be doing this on little slips of paper. My email is in the chat. It's ruth.nicholson@eslind.net. Nicholson is spelled like Jack Nicholson. So send me an email. Tell me who you support for chair and vice chair. Bob Suyama has been nominated for chair. Susan Leckband for vice chair. And we will not announce this after lunch. It's already after lunch. Okay, we'll announce it at break.
Okay. So let's move on to our first item. We're actually early.
Well, we can fix that. Gary Younger, you've got your hand up.
Oh.
Yes, before we get rolling along, I would like to share an announcement with the team. Brian Harkins has been a longtime favorite with the Tank Waste Committee. And just wanted to let you know that he has been selected to be the new assistant manager for mission support. I think he takes that position on Monday. He's been a great voice for DOE to the Tank Waste Committee over the past several years, and just want to let everybody know about his promotion. I don't yet have word on who the next deputy will be, but I'll let you know that when we have that. So those of you who know Brian, if you want to send him an email to congratulate him, that'd be great.
Thank you. Any other announcements?
Jeff Burright, you're in queue.
Hi, Gary, I'm not very familiar with the ORP org chart. Can you help me understand what that means? What is assistant manager for mission support? Who was it before? So I just don't know these things.
Assistant manager for mission support actually is in the RL scope. And I think Jeff Fry was the assistant manager there. He retired, I think, in the fall. And so that position has been vacant for a while. And Brian is, he's done a great job as deputy manager, or deputy assistant manager with tanks, I think, for about 4 years or so. And his leadership and abilities have been recognized, and he's now stepping up as an assistant manager. So he'll actually be working within the RL scope, and mission support is basically a lot of the infrastructure that we kind of take for granted that we can't live without. And I can get you more information on what that particular division does if you want it, but I think that Brian, with the expertise that he has in around the organization, I think he's a very good fit for that. And Stan, if you've got some additional information, if you can help me out here.
Assistant manager for mission support also takes care of the security force on site, as well as infrastructure, as Gary indicated, and a lot of the the streets and roads and things of that nature out on the site, facilities, etc.
Thank you. That makes a lot more sense now. Thanks.
Stan, your hand's back up.
I was trying to put it down.
Oh, he's peeking at us. That's right.
Okay. I think we're ready to move on to the draft advice on cleanup priorities. Chris?
Okay. Ruth, could you please put the first page of the draft advice up?
There we go. Oops, wrong advice. Sorry. There we go. I've got 3 sets of draft advice on the computer right now. So what I'm putting up is a copy of the draft advice that the other committees have all contributed to. So you'll see stuff highlighted in yellow, and that's stuff that has come from the conversation at PIC and RAP. And so we're trying to sort of put it all in one document so there's a little less compilation confusion for BCC tomorrow.
Right. If you could scroll down a little bit, please, so we see background. Tom Galeotto is out of town today, and he asked me to fill in for him. So I'll be giving basically the same presentation on the advice that Tom gave to RAP yesterday. This advice is, especially for new members, this advice is the next in a long string of advices on work priorities and budgets to DOE. DOE tends to go with their budget recommendation, work priority to the Office of Management and Budget 2 years in advance. And so this work priority is discussing 2024 so that it can support DOE as well as support the HAB thoughts on our priorities for budget and work in 2024. The draft is basically follows the same structure and organization as our work priority advice number 309 did last year. It uses the DOE 2022 through 2026 5-year plan as a basic set of information so that we understand what DOE feels their most important priorities are. We can choose to agree with those in the work or not agree with those in the work. Going forward, we follow that. We follow the DOE 5-year plan now, and that they list their work priorities for a 5-year period in 3 categories: tank waste cleanup, Central Plateau cleanup, and river corridor cleanup. In addition, we've added a 4th category. Last year, we called it cross-cutting activities. This year, we're calling it indirect and supporting activities, as that seems to be kind of a better term for work that is common to the tank waste, to the Central Plateau, to the river corridor. As I said, this work focuses on 2024, which is 2 years out. Last year's work focused on 2023, which was in 2 years' work, last year's advice. If we could go to the next page, please. Right here. The only real difference in the background section from this year's advice and last year's advice is the last paragraph that you see on the board. And that is earlier late in 2021, the DOE suggested that the board consider modifying the focus from 1 fiscal year to a time frame spanning the entire DOE 5-year plan, FY 2022 through FY 2026. And the IM team decided not to do that we would prefer to focus on a single year, FY 2024, for the bullet reasons that you see below. We felt that for a number of reasons, we have certain priorities where we advise DOE to accelerate schedule. It's hard to do that when you're talking about a 5-year plan. It's easier when you're talking about 1 year. As we say, when DOE goes for funding, they're going for funding in 2 years from now. That's the same as our advice. And we feel that it would be much stronger to support DOE or to give our advice on the year that we're asking for funding rather than to spread our advice out for a 5-year span of work, where 4 of those years aren't being considered, will not be considered later on this year for funding by the Office of Management and Budget and by Congress. And on the last bullet, it seemed to us that if we go for a 5-year plan, that our advice would seem to be not as focused to DOE on work for a specific year. That is, our advice would be watered down over a 5-year plan rather than focusing on a single year. And we felt that we'd rather have DOE understand what our focus was on a single year than over a 5-year plan. Let's go on to the advice now, Ruth. There are several things that we don't specifically call out in our advice, and that's because they're kind of ongoing year in and year out. And these ongoing activities do occupy a significant portion of the funding that we get. For example, the site has to comply with min-safe conditions every single year. And these are activities associated with critical maintenance and infrastructure, with operations that cannot be shut down, or with operations or work that cannot be stopped without blowing a milestone, a regulatory milestone that management and DOE do not want to miss. So min-safe, certain activities with maintenance infrastructure, all of the activities that support the safe storage of tank waste and a tank integrity program. We want to make sure on a year in, year out basis that the operational status to 224A evaporator is maintained. And these things will go on year in and year out. And so we just mention them here rather than put them in our table for specific advice. Now, with specific advice, let's move down a little bit more, Susan, or Ruth. The table takes this kind of format, and we first developed this table last year. The IM team liked it, the HAB board liked it as a whole, and we understand that DOE liked it. So there are 3 columns in the table. The first column, which is called item, are just simply we give work elements an ID. So TWA is just an identifier. TWB is an identifier. A, B do not imply priorities. A doesn't have more priority than B. B doesn't have more priority than C, and so on and so forth. They're simply IDs. The next priority level, we just have 2 kinds of priority: critical and important. Critical is that work which we feel absolutely must get funding and must go forward. Important is work which, if funding is available, it has to go. That work has to be started, completed, maintained, whatever. But critical is a must, and important is a little bit secondary. But we urge DOE to get funding for the important items as well, and not to let those slide. We didn't want to try and prioritize work, getting stuck in the situation where we say certain types of tank waste cleanup are more important than certain types of river corridor cleanup, which are more important than certain types of central plateau cleanup. So we just have used critical and important. With that, I'll concentrate on the tank waste cleanup section of our advice. I'll pretty much skip the central plateau and river corridor. If you want to see what has been said, I guess Ruth can probably send this out to you if you ask her. But then I will go back at the end and concentrate again on support activities that cut across all 3 of the tank waste, the river plateau, and central plateau and the river corridor. So going on now with the tank waste cleanup. The first one is DF law. Operate DF law and increase throughput to reach full capacity levels of waste vitrification, which are 21 metric tons of glass per day. We felt that this is absolutely a must, and I think as everybody has heard DOE speak over the past year, DOE feels that this is absolutely a must. We spent a long time waiting to get to operation of vitrifying glass, and we just can't let anything stop us. So this is absolutely critical to get funding. Now, going through startup, there's bound to be some startup problems. They may not make 21 metric tons of glass per day, which is what DOE feels is full operational capacity, but we put it in there as a challenge and as a goal. Secondly, critical, resume full capacity operations of the 224-2A evaporator. Now, we mentioned this in the background a little bit. It's one of those things like MinSafe, which is going to go on year after year. But we wanted to put it here again to emphasize the criticality of this, to make sure that this doesn't get dropped or moved somewhere else. We wanted to make sure that this resumes full capacity, so we emphasized it again. Going down to TWC. Now, this is something which actually does not occur. The tank lease detection, characterization, mitigation, cleanup, and communication plan. This does not occur in DOE's 5-year plan. But there's been a lot of discussion about this both in previous board meetings and also in the tank, the SST leak advice that is being formulated right now. This appears in it. And we felt it was important that if it appears in the tank leak advice, that we need to make sure it gets funded. And so we put it here in our advice too. If this should be modified or dropped from the tank leak advice, then we would probably drop it from this advice. Hopefully it won't. Now, this next one we call critical. We call leaking SST closure. Initiate retrieval activities for SSTs known to be leaking. This didn't actually appear as written in the tank leak advice. What appeared in the tank leak advice was said, look, if you have a leaking tank or one believed to be imminently, that could leak imminently, then move that to the top of the line to have its waste treated by vitrification. Input from the tank leak IM team felt that that probably wasn't doable for infrastructural reasons, that you probably couldn't take a tank, say that was down near the bottom for having its waste vitrified and move it to the top without a bunch of infrastructural changes, pipes, so on and so forth. So that was subsequently dropped because it wasn't believed to be doable. But initiating retrieval activities, that might be doable. I don't know, so we're open to comment. The other thing we could do is in the tank leak advice, they have an item in their 2F advice, which says something like allocate funding to a budget line item to manage leaking tanks. So we could take that F that's going to be in the tank leak advice and put that in here and say, fund the budget line item to manage leaking tanks. And then it would be consistent with that particular advice in the tank leak. But I'm certainly open to comments and suggestions on this one here before I go on.
Chris, this is Bob. The IM team has reworked the advice, and I think we need to wait until this afternoon after we work through the advice. And then I'm on this IM team, so based on what we come up with as tank committee recommendations on the advice, I think we may need to update those, the C and the D item to reflect that. And then when we take this to the board, we need to make sure we incorporate any board comments to the linking single shell tank advice into this advice also. So this is a work in progress.
Right. We agree. And in fact, you can see to the right of column 3, Tom put in the words, assure consistency with separate TWC advice being discussed at March HAB. So we're well aware of that, but I just wanted to get this out to everybody who may not be on the tank leak IM team. Okay, going forward, we felt that the SST closures, complete retrieval activities for SST and the AX farm, initiate A farm, felt that was important. And those were also listed in the DOE 5-year plan for FY24. Continued design and construction activities, TWF, supporting the WTP, High Level Waste Facility, TPA milestone. This wasn't as worded in the DOE's 5-year plan, but since they have initiate construction activities of WTP in 2025, they darn well better be continuing design of it in 2024 and perhaps hopefully be able to start construction activities in 2024. So I felt this was important to leave in. TWG, the east-west transfer line, complete activities needed to put 200 EW tank waste transfer line to service. This hasn't appeared either in last year's 5-year plan or this year's 5-year plan. But in last year's 309 advice, we said initiate activities. This year we said complete activities, but I'm not certain where this came from. And Bob, perhaps you can help me here.
I think Tom picked that up from the 5-year plan, but
I couldn't find it. I couldn't find it in there, and I was thinking it probably came maybe from a DOE presentation or from something that someone in the tank waste committee felt was important.
We're going to have to do some more digging on that one.
Yeah. The next one, TWH, this was in last year's advice too. Continue engineered vapor exposure controls for tank farm areas. And Tom has a note here to check with Becky on the HSEP committee to see actually where this stands. Is it still going on? What's the status of it? So we left it in here pending Tom's check with Becky. And the last one, complete design and permitting activities in FY24 to support additional tank waste storage option. And she also have advice number 298. And I think there's a note here to the right, Ruth.
Yeah.
And I can't read it in its entirety. Oh, that's a different. Okay, that's a different note. Again, this doesn't appear in the DOE's 5-year plan, and so I'm thinking this came from a HAB IM team somewhere, either last year or from HAB members that felt that this was an important item that needed to be done. And again, Bob, perhaps you have some thoughts on this, or someone else in the tank waste committee, because I'm not sure where exactly it came from, since it isn't in a 5-year plan.
It's not in the 5-year plan, but this has been something the HAB has been recommending for some time. So I think Tom picked it up just because we are very intense on making sure that they are prepared to add tanks when they need them.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
I see Pam.
Pam?
I think you're right. You're right on with that explanation.
Rob, wait, we've got Pam and Susan in queue. I can put you in. Pam, we're having a real hard time hearing you. Oh dear.
Let's go to Susan while we're waiting for Pam
wait
to.
Wait a minute.
clear
Pam,
up.
are you there?
Yes.
Oh, there you are.
Okay. So I think this relates to Joseph because it's referring to capsules, and he was concerned about the contamination of the concrete in the basins when they remove the capsules.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay.
Okay. I think we're on the tank storage, additional tank storage items still.
All right, so I've got Susan Luckband and Rob in queue. Susan?
Thank you. Yes, the origin of this particular topic is years old. The board itself was reluctant to tell DOE to build more tanks. Um, be, from a perspective of rather than do that, it's identify some kind of additional tank storage with, because everybody understood that all of the tanks are years behind their or beyond their design life. They're either going to leak or they have leaked. And it was just hopefully to get DOE to begin the design, because the whole process takes about 10 years or more. So it was just from a policy perspective, it was y'all ought to be doing some design work so they're on the shelf ready to start building if that need arises. And it comes from the I don't want to say failure, the inability to actually remove the tank waste and remediate it with the first HWBP process and all that kind of thing. So it just has a long life. We expected DOE to start the design process. So that's really where it came from. Thanks.
So Susan, this is a good item to leave in then, in your opinion, right?
Yes, I believe it is.
Okay.
Rob?
Good morning. I exactly what Susan says. You know, this has been talked about for a very long time. I think it's real important for some of our new people to recognize is that one of the reasons why our advice on single shell tank leaking is because they don't have an option. They need an option what to do with the waste in the tanks. And aside from building tanks or whatever, which seems to be resistant in most cases, they need to come up with an option, put something on paper, start the permitting process. Let's have an option that when another tank leaks, that we can respond by pumping it out. I think it's real important that we keep this one. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Rob.
We've got 6 people on the phone, and I actually can't tell if they have their hands up. If you're on the phone and you want to make a comment, a suggestion, *6 will get you off of mute so you can share your thoughts with us. Is anyone on the phone who wants to jump in? Okay, *6 for the folks on the phone. Jacob, what's on your mind? Jacob? I've got you in queue. Are you on mute?
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself while I was trying to unmute.
Oh.
But out of habit, I hit the mute thing. So, you know, are we on the part where we provide comments on this list?
Yes.
So I got one little comment on Sst Closures. The only tank farm that is actually ready to go into the closure phase is Sea Farm. Do you think we ought to add Sea Farm to that list? And then on your too critical at the top that we aren't seeing on the screen, the evaporator and DF law. I haven't looked at the evaporator schedule in a long time, but I suspect it's going to be done in 2014, by 2024. If it's not, and you don't do DF law, it is Jacob Reynolds' opinion that the evaporator is useless without DF law running. And that's a little bit longer conversation on why it's not completely useless, but its mission is extremely small. So I myself put DF law, you know, much more important than the evaporator. It's not, that's just a thought. I don't know that it's doing any harm listing it under critical, but that's just where I'm at.
Thank you, Jacob.
Okay,
Liz?
and we'll certainly take these comments back to the IM team for further consideration. Ruth, let's go down to the supporting activities if there are no more comments on
I just have
Tank
a,
Waste.
We have Liz in queue.
and I'm sorry, I'm sorry I didn't notice this before. I'm wondering if it makes more sense to just have the category for TWD and TWE to be leaking SSTs and not leaking SST closure, since we're saying retrieval activities, or it could be leaking SST retrieval. It just doesn't totally make sense to use the word closure there, or for the next one, if we're saying retrievals, we could just say SST retrieval. I don't know if there's, and that might get at Jacob's question about closure. It just seems like it makes more sense to say SST retrieval or leaking SSTs. Thanks.
Okay, that's good. Okay, Ruth, now let's go down to the supporting activities.
I'm gonna save this. Right.
The first one, which we thought was critical, was for DOE to develop a plan for EPA, ecology, and the general public on how DOE will conduct current and future workforce planning and development to assure workforce availability. So DOE should A, engage the current workforce, B, identify any potential risk to accomplishing waste processing campaigns that require uninterrupted operations depending on trained workers, and C, make tangible investments in the next generation workforce. The next one, worker safety, prioritize Hanford worker safety. And I had a comment here, which was, is this preaching to the choir? Hanford safety is prioritized in every single project, and even also in level of effort work. So does it have to be here? And I think Liz made a comment in our IM team that perhaps this could also be keyed into training and make it a little bit more global and stronger advice. So we're certainly open to comments on that too.
We've got Pam. Let's check in with Pam. She's got something. Pam?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, we're traveling cross country, so it's a little challenging. So I assume that the Department of Energy could you, let's see, it has a plan for workforce recruitment, workforce training, and so forth. Could you put that one on the screen, please? The workforce issues. If they have that, which I assume they do, we look pretty silly to tell them to do it. So does anyone have knowledge that they don't have that kind of a plan?
I'll just say political risk. If they have one, it hasn't worked. Is just my opinion. I mean, there probably is work in certain places, but I think we're in critical need of experience in a bunch of areas.
So I mean, the Savannah Riverside is kicking butt in terms of this, but let's do a little bit of work to see what's already exists before we adopt this, and we've got a little time. I don't want to look silly. Thank you.
Okay. The I think as people are aware, especially people who've been on the board for a long time, the funding for board activities has gone down. But DOE's expanding, wants to expand board members, expand diversity, expand inclusivity. So we want to use that as a lever to say, if you're going to expand the board, expand the members on the board, and especially if you want to expand the education level of people on the board and wind up with people on the board that perhaps are not able to take days off to attend meetings like this or board meetings or to go to regional meetings, then we want you to fully fund the board for a variety of reasons. We want you to fund the board to hold 6 full board meetings a year, with one of those being a regional meeting, and a full complement of committee and issue managers meeting is needed. We want you to fund regional public involvement meetings. We want you to reinstate travel reimbursements for board alternates. We want you to invest in technology improvements for all Hanford public meetings, including board meetings, to continue to grow the capacity for virtual or technology assisted participation. And there was a suggestion yesterday that for people who can't take days off, who are sacrificing pay to attend full day meetings, it typically happens, that perhaps these people could get some sort of reimbursement or stipend for attending the meetings. And that was just a suggestion that came out yesterday. But basically, we want the board to, we want DOE to reinstate board funding. And as a lever to do that, we want to use their commitment to expand diversity, inclusivity into the HAB. Going down one more. DF law is going to require a lot of additional funding as it goes forward operationally to meet its goal and to meet its schedule. So it's been suggested that we include this ISAD as important, that DOE provide an engineering operational plan for public review that defines how the existing assumptions of annual Hanford funding will be utilized to support DF law and also the many other significant Hanford cleanup operations, ensuring that, for example, that RL is fully funded and that funding isn't removed from RL in order to fund ORP and DF law. And the last one, and this was originally an item in the background, and it got moved. It seemed to be more of an advice item than a background item. And Tom's note on the right said, is this something that should really remain in as an advice item? And it is the board request that DOE establish an improved site infrastructural program that can be accomplished at a reduced cost compared to prior years. This will allow more appropriated Hanford budget to be employed for actual Hanford cleanup objectives. So blah, 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 blah. So the concern is that if infrastructure takes up a lot of funding, is there a way to accomplish the same thing cheaper so that funding can go to other cleanup elements? That's what we're asking. And as I said, Tom wasn't sure whether this is something that we should keep in. We discussed a little bit in the IM, and we decided to put it in, and come back to it based upon possible thoughts as we present this at the various committee meetings. So that's my improvisation of Tom Galeotto. And if you have any additional comments or thoughts on anything that's been presented here, I'll certainly be glad to write them down, or Ruth write them down, and we'll consider them in the IM team, which is going to have a call, I believe, next week.
I think Josh set up that call, right, Josh?
I believe so, yes.
It's Tom's call. I think he wants it on the 28th. And I think the notice came out, Ruth.
Did it? Okay.
22nd at 11 a.m.
And there's a BCC meeting tomorrow. So multiple opportunities to connect with the advice.
And I'm only 5 minutes over.
Shall we keep moving, Bob?
Yeah, if there's no more comments on this advice piece, I think we're ready. So next item on our agenda is a open forum. Usually we do it late in the day and we use it as a time buffer. But today it's because of the attendance of some of the key people, we're having an open forum early. And so I guess I'd like to open it up to any of the members of the team to, if they have something they want to discuss. I have quite a list here myself, but I'll give you first shot. Okay,
I kind of want to know what's on your list.
I see some people on the list. Are those for Ruth previous?
Those are previous. I don't have anybody currently in queue.
Oh, great. Well, I'll start it then.
Bob.
I'll start it then, and hopefully we'll have a little discussion. Well, this meeting was kind of starting late because we had planned on having a couple of presentations from DOE, and those kind of fell through at the last minute. I know that it is very difficult at times for Gary to get presentations approved and ready for discussion at our HAB meetings and the board committee meetings. So I've heard in the past that I think the Oregon Waste Cleanup Board actually just had people from DOE come in and they had a conversation, not necessarily a presentation. And a lot of the topics that we're interested in would really benefit just to have the SME and the DOE lead come in and talk to us, because we have questions and things that we need to be clarified. And we really don't need to have a big presentation telling us all about the project, because we know quite a bit about it already. One of them that was on the agenda was the test bed initiative. And I know that they had put out the WEIR, and on the second, they were asking for the comments to the WEIR to come in. We didn't really need a big presentation because I think most of us did see the WEIR presentation. But if we could have just got the right person to come in and just talk to to the committee about some of the comments they got back on the WEIR, what the path forward was for the test bed initiative. That would have given us a lot of good information, and I think we would probably gone away pretty happy with the results. So we didn't ask for a presentation, and I was wondering maybe, I think Jeff might have been at the Oregon Waste Board, and maybe Gary could kind of describe and discuss that a little bit and see if that's a option for the future. Presentations, not so much, conversations, a lot more.
Bob, I suppose I can kick off with my impressions. We've always tried to frame our Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board meetings as a little different, where we invite the agencies to let their hair down a little bit. And maybe it's just, you know, the suggestion of it that makes it so. But you're right in how you characterize it, that, and it took some convincing, both from our part, and Gary made some efforts internally at DOE as well, to try to impress upon them that what we were looking for was people, not presentations. That we just wanted people that we could talk to. And we had, oh shoot, what's his last name? Tom, who does all the ORP stuff.
Fletcher.
Fletcher, thank you. And Delmar Noyes both came. And, you know, they had their handwritten list of, here are the things I just want to let you know are kind of on our minds. And then we had, and, you know, our agency people, we didn't have our own presentations. We let DOE just say, we're here. And our members, some of them are not very familiar with these topics, and some of them really follow. And so there was a good mix of kind of general questions as well as some pretty specific ones about the status of the waste treatment plant, you know, what's going on with the Tisker columns as they get created. You know, we talked about leaking tanks, and we're able to tease apart the complications involved. And we're able to have a good back and forth conversation. And I don't, you know, it's hard to put my finger on what makes it different, other than there was just a different vibe where we were willing to be expansive, to think through the complexities of it all. You know, and we weren't, maybe it's because we don't have as many products that come out of that board. And so there's less of a, you know, what I say here is going to get put into advice or whatnot. I don't know. But it was a good conversation. I was glad to have it. But honestly, you know, it felt to me somewhat like how HAB meetings used to be, where we used to have subject matter experts come to the meetings and be there to engage in discussion and answer questions and do all of that. Like, you know, it wasn't that long ago that we were having those kinds of conversations. That's all I got for now.
Gary, do you want to jump in before we go to Esteban?
Sure, I'll be happy to. And as Jeff had said, we had several conversations over several months to try to design what the meeting was going to look like, format and et cetera. And a lot of good lessons were learned. The folks that we had speaking on behalf of both the tanks, Tisker, and or three things: tanks, Tisker, and WTP. They came away, you know, reasonably happy with how things went, with where they weren't reading slide deck like a lot of times we have been doing. Senior management was happy. And I think that that's something that we want to tweak a little bit more with Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board and see how we can adapt that to things going forward with the HAB. The two organizations are completely different beasts, and we want to try to figure out a way to, get back to the more conversational, informal type atmosphere and format. And it's something that we are looking at, and stand by.
I have Esteban and Dan Solitz in queue. Esteban.
Yes, thank you, Ruth, and appreciate what Bob and Jeff had to say, because hearing especially yesterday's conversation, I think Ruth for putting about how, and hearing from EPA, DOE, and ecology, and as a person, who's worked in the field, who's worked in campaign, and before I came here to Washington State, I was in DC working for a nonprofit that, in the science realm. One of the big things that stood out was that, engaging the public, right? And how this is an ongoing process of democracy, right? And not to make it simple, but kind of micro target that we do have to inform the public. This is a process, right? It's not going to happen overnight. And I think I find myself too in my work, my personal work, nonprofits, everything, reminding folks, because having conscious about how COVID moved us into this Zoom world realm, right? I think like Jeff mentioned and stuff is you find yourself dealing with all that, right? And we're in a rural community. I remember, I think, the big issues now at the federal level is like, does the technology exist, right? And how are we going to deal with communicating with different communities? So I think for us is like, especially when it comes to the technical issues, I think I've been, somebody I was nailed down, somebody pointed out 2 books to me that I should really read. And I think like that's a big thing is like, I think what's been mentioned by Bob and Jeff. Okay, technical experts, let me know what's the homework I got to do on this, because you know way more on it. So I got to be conscious of that. So if I were and kind of check my ego that, hey, I got to look into it, but it's got to be coming from the people working in day out, right? Because we are in the process, it's evolution. That's it. And how do we evolve from this, from maybe meetings and everything in person to this tech, the Zoom worlds or the metaverse nowadays, Thank you.
Dan Solitz.
Yes, thank you. I was at that meeting at the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board, and I was just really pleased with the result of the kind of informal nature of the whole discussion process. There was a lot more conversation than I've heard in the past when they've just used the slide deck, and I think people were kind of intimidated to ask specific questions. But this wasn't the case. There was a lot of really good conversation. I think it was a very successful thing, and I think it would probably work in some areas on the HAB.
Bob, let's get you off of mute.
You muted us all.
Well, someone's having fun with desk papers, and I couldn't tell who it was.
So, Gary, for our next meeting, would you be willing to try to do something like this? I know that always on our agenda, we are very concerned and like to be brought up to date on the DF law, critical path, the startup activities, and the melter, heat up, and Tisker, all those kind of things. If we had someone just come in and say, okay, this is where we are, and what do you need to know? I think that would be a very quick and efficient way to bring the committee up to speed on all those things, and we can ask questions of the things that we want to learn, what the status and what the lessons learned are from those activities. Do you think we can try this out at our next meeting?
Bob, that is my goal to get to.
Okay.
So in other words, yes, I'm going to continue trying. Some of the things you were asking for this time, I think if this meeting was next week or week after, we might have been able to pull it off. Timing just did not line up. I know you wanted additional information on the TBI, where and that public comment period had just closed last week, so we haven't yet had a chance to analyze a lot of the comments to get you additional information on there. The other that you had asked for, trying to get a couple of folks in to make comments on some of the discussions with single shell tanks, those are still ongoing. So nothing yet to report out. Like I said, timing really played a big part in that this time around. And just like other things, if I can pull it together, you bet. I would much rather try to have fewer slides and more conversation, because it's far easier for me to get a five slide slide deck through headquarters than it is a 10 or 12 slide deck. So makes my life easier as well.
Okay. So let's, I'll put that on our wish list for the future here. Any other comments on this topic? Because I do have my list in front of me.
Steve Anderson has his hand up.
Okay.
Well, Bob, I would still like to see a conversation over waste definition characterization for those tanks. It's not going to go away. It's a big deal. I think it still needs to be discussed, and the HAB should have a view on it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That is on my list. We'll see if we can move it up a little. We did have a proposal before the EIC on the non-high-level waste classification, and we were trying to figure out how we could bring it before the board and maybe have a roundtable so everybody had a chance to weigh in, because that topic, we had a lot of people on both sides, and we knew that it would not be an easy thing to bring forward as consensus advice. So the idea was to have a DOE presentation that lays it out at one meeting, and then at the next meeting, after people had a chance to think about it and talk to the people they represent, they could come back and we could have a roundtable where everybody had a chance to speak their mind on it. And then we could document that and send it forward to the tri-party agencies as what the public feels about that topic. So next on the list, I think, is Rob.
Rob, what's on your mind?
Well, you were asking for items, and I think that we should, and I think we mentioned this once before, that we need to be brought up to speed on the preservation of assets being done for the WTP, and the readiness of the HLW and the pre-treat facility to proceed. I think that if we need to step in and make some recommendations, they put temporary covers or build the roof in or something just to protect the equipment inside. I think that's something that the Tank Waste Committee could make a recommendation for.
Okay. Another item for the list. Okay. So the next topic that I wanted to maybe spend some time talking about is at our January 19th meeting, Carrie Myers stated that we are not a technical board, and that DOE gives us the information we need to provide them with advice. And when I look at the list of things that we want to know about, most of them, you need a little bit of a technical background just to understand what's in the presentations and what's going on. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what level of information, of topics that we should be following up on. And frankly, I'm very confused because for us to be able to understand the issue well enough to provide even high-level advice, we need to delve into some of these topics a little more. And I'm pretty sure that the Tank Waste Committee was one of the committees that she was really pointing to when she said we went down rabbit trails searching for information. So comments on that. I guess I'm looking for some people to steer me right here.
I've got Chris and Dan both with ideas. Chris?
Right, I have two thoughts on this, Bob. First, in any kind of structured problem solving, group problem solving session, or any kind of structured Six Sigma or Kaizen work streamlining process section, the first step is always problem definition. But the next step is, what are the facts? What are the facts? And so I think with regard to any advice that we give, one of the critical items is, what are the facts? So that everybody who's concerned with the advice is on the same page, has the same kind of background information. These can be technical facts, or these can be institutional facts, or any other kind of facts. But to give good advice in a group where your advice solutions involve some kind of brainstorming, the team needs to know the facts and everybody needs to see the same facts. So that's the first thing I had. And the second thing was, a long time ago in one of the board meetings, I don't know, last year sometime, I suggested that it would be really nice to see what DOE and the agencies consider to be high-level policy advice, and to have them make up something. Well, it could be tank leaks, for example, or anything else, and give a couple examples of what they would consider to be high-level advice. I think that would be quite informative for us all, because when I look up definitions of policy, one of the common elements, and they're all over the place, one of the common elements is a set of rules. Policy is a set of rules formulated by a government, an organization, an individual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and it goes on from there. Well, a lot of our advice are sets of rules. So I think it would be interesting to see what DOE considers to be high-level policy advice. So those are my two thoughts for the day.
Right. Lots of folks in queue on this one. Dan Solitz, and then Jacob, you're up next. Dan?
Yes, thank you. I'll be brief. In thinking about the policy versus the technical, I'm wondering if they aren't referring to the fact that we're not the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, we're not the Defense Facilities Nuclear Waste Safety Review Board. We're a different kind of body from those, and I'm wondering if that isn't the distinction they're trying to make, and maybe it'd be good to ask them just right out front, or the FFRDC that is working on and going to grout and asking questions like, is there enough coal dust if we want to do steam reforming and that sort of thing. Getting into the technical level down to that detail that those technical boards do, and that we need to be at a little bit higher level. And I think it'd be good idea to ask them if that's where they're headed, because it is really murky right now, to me anyway. Thank you.
Gary, do you want to address that now, or?
Yeah, I'm sitting here basically listening to the conversation, and I think for the most part, what we're looking for is, if you want us to drive to Vancouver, say, go to Vancouver next Thursday. And that would be the policy advice that would be useful. If you say, drive to Vancouver, start at 4:13 a.m. and make sure that you have 32 pounds of pressure in the tires. Make sure you stop at a specific gas station and fill up with 25 gallons of unleaded and grab a coffee while you're in there. And I want you to take Highway 14 and stop at a particular restaurant for a bite to eat. That gets into the technical part, which isn't necessarily helpful. So the less prescriptive that advice can be, I think is probably more along of what we're looking for. Is that helpful?
Thank you. So I've got Jacob, Jeff, and Susan Leckband, and then I want to check with our 5 folks on the phone. Jacob?
All right, can you hear?
Yes, we can.
All right, so, you know, I'm one of the more technical people on the board, and we have lots of people who are not technical. So, and none of our advice reads really technical to me. And I presented to dozens of technical review groups, and they are absolutely nothing like the board. So I'm sort of surprised that they think we're too technical, because they aren't even in the same universe. So that's kind of my thought. This board would be dramatically different if it were a technical board. And I didn't join this because I wanted to be on a technical board. I joined this because I wanted to be on a policy board. And I think that we benefit from having some technical people on the board, because there are some things where the policy advice is influenced by the underlying technical thing. And if you look at the EM's own board, so we have, each of the sites have something like a HAB, but at the EM level, they have a board, and you go and look at the resumes and why they selected those people, and they tend to really emphasize this person has a PhD in this, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but they give policy advice. So, you know, I suspect that this anti-technical stuff is going to go away, mostly because you look at the advice and there's almost nothing technical in it. So I think it's all a red herring that will blow over someday.
Jeff, and then Susan Leckband.
Thanks. I think that something that's been happening lately, and maybe for a long time in the conversation, is that we conflate technical versus information. And this gets to what Chris Sutton was talking about, of we need to understand the facts and the information in order to give good policy advice. And to build on what Gary's analogy talks about of, you know, I don't necessarily want to tell you, I think you should drive to Vancouver until I understand the road conditions and the optimal routes and where the gas stations are and the capabilities of your vehicle, because I want to give you informed advice when I make that high level policy recommendation. And that requires a lot of information to feed into the policy level advice. And I keep going back over and over again to the remarks that were made at the very first HAB meeting in 1994 by John Wagner from DOE. And, you know, a couple of the things that he said, I'm going to cherry pick a little bit here. You know, DOE will not presume what you need to know or when you need to know it. We will not limit the scope of your work. I use that as a shining star. And he says, the creation of this board has a simple driver. I need your advice. I need you to understand our mission and goals and how we propose to achieve them and the limits on our resources. I need your thoughtful judgments about major decisions we must make and how we should go about making them. That how we should go about making them gets a little more into detail. But there is another thing he says that is worth talking about. He says, over the years, the site has been advised by more than 200 independent technical experts and groups, including some of the nation's best scientific minds. In the future, we can and we will call on such individuals and organizations for independent technical review and advice. I think it would be unfortunate and counterproductive if this board tried to be one of Hanford's 200 technical advisors. I do want you to be my one counselor on key policy matters that affect many different interests. So there is, from the start, been, I think, this balance between you need the information to make good policy advice, but we're not telling you what your glass recipe ought to be. So that's just been there. One thing I will bring up to close my comments here, there was the GAO recommendation related to tank closure that we've talked about in past meetings that did specifically talk about DOE looking at how they are involving the public and bringing them along in technical understanding of the models that underlie tank closure and emphasizing the importance of getting technical buy-in or informational buy-in, to fix my own terminology here, from members of the public and stakeholders to build trust in the decisions that are being made. There's an issue manager team that exists right now that is kind of a blend of pick and tank waste to try to turn that into something, and maybe we fold this conversation into it. I admit I've been pulled in a lot of different directions and that group hasn't met yet, but I have jotted down some notes. So maybe that's somewhere this conversation could go. Thanks.
Susan, and then I'm going to check in with folks on the phone if they want to participate as well. Susan.
Thank you. It is clear to me that we need a certain level of technical information in order for it to burble up into policy level advice. There's no question. This is as confusing as the request to give DOE actionable advice. Every piece of advice we have provided is actionable. DOE may choose not to act on it, but every piece of advice is actionable. So that charge to us is extraordinarily confusing, and we are not a regulator. There's no question about that. We develop a work plan each year. As long as the information that we are asking for isn't a national secret and is related to our work plan in some way, then it is part of the policy process. We have to learn why, what decision they're making, what goes into making that decision technically, in order for us to understand and run that advice through the board's values, which are very clear, and everybody should have a copy of those, and probably does. And those are at the policy level. So the problem, I suspect, is that information requests have to go through a large body of people who are not in this area, who are at headquarters, and they have one mission, and it is not necessarily to provide us the information we need. We have taken pride over the years in providing informed advice, not shoot from the hip advice, not emotional. It is, here's what we believe serves board and public values, and a decision or path forward or whatever the Department of Energy should take. And we've had this discussion over the years because it is a lot of work to provide us that kind of information that we feel we need to provide informed advice. And it's our job to burble that advice up to a policy level. That's our job to do that. That's what we've charged ourselves, and what the Department of Energy has charged us with doing, as well as all the other documents that make this board run efficiently. So this is always an ongoing question. It is making sure, and it's our duty to make sure that we don't tell them exactly how to do something. And we have people on the board who believe that, and I'm probably one of those people who would say, you know, that's maybe telling them how. Let's tell them the result that we want, what we expect. And that's the policy level. So this is a good discussion to have, and we should always have it with new members. And it's a process that we go through each time we generate advice. the fact that we have been unable to get the information that we need to provide informed advice sends a message to us that, and it makes it difficult for us to do what we signed up to do. Thank you.
We've got about 5 folks on the phone. Do any of you on the phone want to jump in with a thought, an idea, a suggestion? Quiet on the phone. Just don't want to leave you out just because you're on the phone. Bob.
Yes, since we had our discussion at the start of the meeting on how Ruth hasn't eaten lunch yet, I thought I think we might want to go to break a little early, let her get a bite, and come back at 2 for to start, or maybe even a little earlier. Jeff, could you start earlier on our discussion of the tank leak? I think we might be able to use that time.
Ready whenever.
Okay, Ruth, how long do you need to grab a bite? Oh, actually, I did eat early today, so I appreciate your thoughtfulness. I'd say, do you want to come back in 15 minutes, which is 20 till 1:40? Yes, that sounds good. 1:40. Okay, so we're ready, huh? Say one thing before we start going through this advice. I wanted to remind everybody to vote. I should have done that before the break. But if you'd send an email to Ruth with who you want to vote for, right now it's just me and Susan McMahon as the vice chair. So with that, Jeff, are you in control? He is in control. But just know I can kick anybody out of the meeting if I get a mind to. I've never done it.
All right. Well, here we are again to talk about the single shell tank proactive leak mitigation advice, I guess is what we are calling it. Something along those lines. As a reminder, we brought this before the full board back in December. And for a number of reasons, it was decided it wasn't going to move forward. One of the big ones being just time, that there was a desire to let the agencies have some time to work it out themselves. We're going to try again in March at the full board meeting, assuming that this advice makes it out of committee today. From December to today, the issue management team got back together. We took the feedback that we received during the full board meeting, as well as just trying to clean it up, clarify some points, and what should have gone out to all of you in the meeting invite is what you'll see on the screen here. The background fits on one page. That isn't the entirety of it is here on the screen in front of you. Hopefully the text is appropriate size for reading. I can zoom in further if you'd like, just let me know. And then we have some changes to our advice points based on feedback as well as additional discussion, and we can go through those one by one. But I guess without further ado, let's see what people think.
So Jeff, can I break in here?
Please.
One thing the IM team asked for us to do was to invite DOE and ecology, the people that been working on this to this meeting to share if there's any progress or anything that they think we should focus on or discuss in our advice. And Steve and I did that, and oh shoot, I think it was Brian Harkin and Jeff Lyons that we invited. So I guess I'd like to see if they have anything they want to share with us before we jump in. Thank you.
Jeff, are you with us? I thought I saw your name earlier.
This is Ryan. I don't I don't quite see Jeff on yet, but I can share from the standpoint of ecology that we're continuing to work through the enforcement process with DOE, and we don't have anything further to share at this time. I think Jeff was still planning to be on at the original time at 2, but so if there's any, I guess, clarifying kind of questions or on some technical aspects or stuff like that, I think Jeff could be able to help out with that. But my understanding is I think his schedule's free up at 2 because I know this moved up about 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, and the reason it was scheduled at 2 was to make it work for him. So
oh, okay,
good. That's why open forum was earlier than normal. Is we were trying to make the timing work.
Okay. So, Mr. Burbright, you're up.
All right. How should we do this, Bob? Should we just go paragraph by paragraph? Does anybody have any general thoughts before we get going?
I think going through the paragraphs and discussing why we changed it. We summarized and shortened the background. I think what's left we need to look at.
Got it. Okay. So again, what you see here is the background. It is significantly shorter than it used to be. However, we were paying attention when the new members said that they liked the additional context. And so the way we've decided to manage it here at this point is to have an appendix to the advice. Let's see, oops, I missed it. With supporting background context. We moved a lot of this back here and added this line that says this appendix contains the informed thinking that supported development of the advice. So trying to get right to the point in the beginning while not losing for people who want this additional context and to know the fuller story, that you have access to it and it's right here. That's why this is shorter here up at the front.
Are there any questions from new members about kind of the anatomy of the advice and how it got put together? Is there anything that's confusing you? Okay. I don't want you to be shy. I actually don't want you to be confused.
All right, not seeing people jumping in queue, and I have a hard time seeing it, so please.
Yeah, we don't have anybody in queue right now.
Okay. Should we just go paragraph by paragraph then? If anybody has any questions or comments or suggested changes to the first paragraph. Now's a good time.
I don't have anyone in queue. Oh, Susan Leckband.
Thank you. And I really like the changes that have been made here, but it might be helpful for the new members that are on this to just quickly go over the process of what happens. As an example, we're going to go through this advice, make whatever changes, and then it comes out of this committee with consensus before it goes to a full board, just so people understand, you know, we develop the advice and then that's kind of the process. So I want to make sure that they know that they can step in and this isn't a done deal. There is a process involved here. Okay, Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great point, Susan. Thank you for the reminder. Yeah, this consensus remains the gold standard. And our goal coming out of this meeting, as the people who have continued to draft this advice, is to earn the consensus of this committee. But that's not a guarantee. And any one voice can withhold that consensus based on, whatever policy or interest or concern that you have. So please make sure that if you have interests here, that you do speak up.
And we have quite a few people on the phone. Do you think we need to read the paragraph by paragraph so they know what we're looking at?
Hey,
Well,
Bob, this is Rich Bloom. I'm on the phone, but I don't need a paragraph by paragraph read. Why don't you ask the other people?
Okay. Is there any of there's 6 folks on the phone. Is there anyone on the phone that needs us to read paragraph by paragraph? Okay. I will check in with you periodically, but if there's no one that needs that, I would suggest going ahead.
Okay.
Which is basically a time constraint, not a I don't want to hear from somebody thing.
Yeah,
okay.
I would love to make sure we have time to actually talk through the advice points. So I don't want to get caught here. Paragraph number 2. Questions, comments, edits?
Nobody in queue.
Okay. We'll move on, but if people want to back up, just let us know. Paragraph number 3, do no harm during cleanup is a value that has been held by the Hanford Advisory Board.
Nobody in queue.
Okay. The final paragraph of the background, this used to be advice point number 1 that had been reworked with some help after the last meeting. We decided to bring it up here in the background as kind of the underlying why of the advice that the agencies are about to read.
Nobody in queue.
Okay, buckle up. Here we go. We're going to work through this advice. Advice point number 1. We're trying to keep it as simple and to the point as possible. The board believes the agencies should remove all liquid waste, including the interstitial liquid, from the SSTs as soon as possible, before they have a chance to leak into the environment, contaminating the water table and potentially the Columbia River.
Nobody in queue.
Okay. Advice point number 2. This is another one of those where we reorganized from the December meeting, where we now have one large advice point that is all about generating a plan. In the previous advice from December, it was broken up into many, many different advice points. Now we have a nested advice point here. So develop a comprehensive long-term plan to address leak detection, characterization, mitigation, cleanup, and communication. And maybe we ought to specify that we're talking about the single shell tanks here. I see as I as I read it.
So for those on the phone, that means adding to number 2, the clarification that the plan that's being requested applies to the single shell tanks. And Jeff Lyon is with us from Ecology. Thank you for joining us, Jeff. We're going over the advice points in the draft advice on leaking tanks.
I don't know if we want to back up and see if Jeff has any general guiding thoughts for us or reactions, or if we want to let him settle in while we go over these advice points.
Do you have a preference, Jeff?
Yeah, give me a couple minutes. I know where you're at. I can see that on the screen, so that's good. I want to glance at the advice, and then if there's something in particular you want to ask me, I do want you to ask me. So just give me a couple minutes. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks. Okay, so we've said that a plan ought to exist, and then we get into what we think that some of the key elements of that plan should be. The first one relates to input into the plan from public tribes, EPA, State of Washington. Keep it fairly general, really simple. The next key element, timely assessment and communication of tank leaks. This used to say assessment and mitigation. We've broken that into different concepts. This one is really about assess and communicate the tank leak when a new tank leak when it happens. But we also get into some specific examples of the information that we wish we would have had to help us put the B109 leak into greater risk-related context. And that's what we're talking about here. We also include this point here that the lead regulatory agency should be involved as soon as a leak is suspected. This line replaces a piece of advice that used to be in here but got removed, which was about having the lead regulatory agency in the room earlier in the leak assessment process. We're saying the same thing, just in a different place.
Esteban, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the things that was interesting to hear, and especially from the federal and state agencies, was how, in looking at the budgetary process, it's future thinking. And on that note about the long-term plan, that things change, especially with Congress and receiving the money, right? So in this thing about timely assessment and long-term plan, I think my thing is, and then having the public involved, tribes, EPA, and everybody, should that be more about on a 2-year increment, which that's how Congress re-elections work and campaigns? And that's my thing, because I think yesterday, I think that was the thing that to me that kind of stood out, how some, of course, then when the money's not received, and then the budgets, and hearing today about budgets and the board, that seems to be the thing that sometimes at the end determines if the work gets done or not. Thank you.
Go to Rob. Jeff, why don't you read what you're proposing to add so the folks on the phone can hear it?
Yeah. Thanks. Esteban, based on what I'm hearing you say, I'd put a line in here. When we originally were talking about this, I think it's fair to say we were envisioning just a one-time, this is our plan for what we're going to do going forward and how we're going to do it. What I think I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the plan ought to be looked at again every couple of years, and that when you do that look every couple of years, you're also involving the public, tribes, EPA, and the state. Is that right, or are you saying something different?
No, yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Rob.
I I was part of the IM team and had given many comments to this. Though, if you go back to the just beginning of number 2, I really think that a lot of us were thinking in context that we have a tank, it's leaking radioactive waste. Oh, that's against the law by EPA. That's against the law by the state of Washington. They need to go clean it up immediately. Okay. Any other company out there, whether it's a nuclear station or whatever, has emergency response plans where they have set aside and pre-staged certain activities. They understand what the problem is, okay? And then they put it into mode when that thing fails, when that emergency is needed. We want these leaks in these tanks to be considered an emergency. They need to take care of them. Thinking of this as a long-term programmatic thing, well, I would hope it wouldn't be. I would hope they'd have all the pumps and everything they'd have already staged and ready to go, plans to say what we're going to do, change the negative pressure, get the salt wells, whatever they're going to do, put it on paper. So when it happens again in another 2 years and we get another leak, we can just move into action, that we can have the equipment there. Okay, that's one extreme of this particular set of advice, because we don't have options. We have what we have now is it's still leaking. And so anyway, I'd like to put that context into what we're saying here, because we know they're never ever going to clean up some of the stuff on the bottom of the tank where the leak is. So, but what we want to do is the leak stop, because it's contributing to all the stuff going down to the water table. I don't need to say any more on that.
Rob, as you were talking, I was shifting around in the advice to show that some of the stuff that you're talking about, I think, is included in here. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the things we talked about at our last IM team meeting is what I've got highlighted here, where we see value in having a standing team that has the equipment, in the near term and is trained to proactively remove liquids and respond to emerging leaks. Is that what you're talking about? Close to it? I don't know if you're talking or muted or.
Rob?
I am sorry. So go to the beginning though of the advice here, where we start talking about the plan and what it should include in that. The word cleanup, don't we want to plan to address the leak? Isn't what this whole piece of advice is? We have a leaking tank. Tomorrow, they're going to have another leaking tank. What are they going to do about it? Well, we don't know. What we're trying to get them to do is know ahead of time what's going to happen. Tell us that we're safe. And then that plan needs to include things like compositional leak, how you're going to get it out, magnitude, all those kind of other things. So I think that this part of the advice needs to be very direct and very to the point, that we have a tank and it's leaking, okay? EPA, everybody says, got to stop it as soon as possible. We're not doing that. I don't know.
Queue, please.
I'm muted now.
Okay, I've got Pam and Chris Sutton in queue. Pam?
And Richard.
Rob, we do not have consensus for that viewpoint, Rob. I think some of us look at the big picture and we see that 450 billion gallons of radioactive waste was poured into trenches during operation years, and that unfortunate that this leak is occurring. It is not consequential enough to redirect funding when we're in the process of finishing construction of the waste treatment plant. So that's why this advice talks about pursuing technical options, looking at ways to deal with this in the future. So we're not ignoring it, but we're not saying stop getting the cesium and strontium capsules out of WESF and deal with this tank that's leaking in an environment that's already contaminated. So I understand your passion. There is not consensus. Thank you.
Chris, before I jump to you, I think I heard somebody from the phone. Richard, was that you who wanted to jump in? *6 gets you off mute on the phone. I heard somebody and I didn't catch you. Okay, we'll go to Chris and then I'll double check back with the phone. Chris?
Yeah. Jeff, if you go back to number F under allocate budget for managing SSTs, I'm wondering if, listening to Rob, if we said the board sees value in having a team, what if we said having an emergency response team? I wonder if just those few words could, having an emergency response team that is whatever, that could get a sense of urgency that Rob wants.
Yeah, I understand folks' perspective that, and I think the other guiding thing that we had, that they should develop all this stuff in the idea that it's a policy statement. It's going to be a policy statement that we're going to be prepared for leaks. That's what we want, and I don't see that they are. They, as pointed out by the RQEE reports, is that every couple of years we get another tank leaking every couple of years. So it's happening, and at some point it may seem that as a total, the amount that they're leaking will be significant. We don't know that. That's all. And yeah, the easiest way to get it all done is to clean all the single shell tanks out. But thank you for understanding my position, folks.
All right, let's go to Chris, and then I want to check back in with folks on the phone. Chris?
I think I already said, I already had a comment and I already said it. So you
right.
Move on.
All right. Anybody on the phone need to jump in?
Yeah, this is Rich Bloom. Rob, I think the intent, the intent of the first advice point gets directly to your issue. We should not be preparing for leaks. We should be preventing leaks. And that's why the initial point, which comes back to, is we can assume that every single shell tank has failed, because there's no reason to believe it hasn't. They're well past their age. They're, just like you said, it's just why look for a leak when the better approach is just to remove the 3 million gallons of liquid that's out there. And so the focus is to get the liquid out. That is the whole thing. It's to get the technology, not to redirect efforts on a leaking tank, because in 10 years, they don't know which one to go to because they'll all be leaking. The approach is to, quote, get the ability to remove the liquids, start removing the liquids. That will solve the leaking problems. And, they aren't going to go in and remove the waste from all these tanks in the next 10 years, because really there's no place to put it. But there is a place to put all the liquids that are in the tanks.
Jeff, do you want to recap some of the things you've added so folks on the phone can imagine where you're adding some words and some clarity?
Yeah, thank you. So I was playing with some word language as people were talking. The one that's right here on the screen, just based on the discussion between Richard and Rob, do we want to add a a value policy statement of the sort that says the best way to prepare for future leaks is to prevent them. Is that necessary to say in addition to what's preceding it? I think the only other change was what Chris had recommended, which is to say an emergency response team down under item F, and then keep the rest.
Thank you. I don't have people in queue right now. So let's pick up where we left off going through number 2.
Okay. So we talked about timely assessment and communication of tank leaks. We give some examples, but we don't want to see this treated as or perceived as a technical prescription. We are saying these are the kinds of things we want to see in an assessment. The last item in here is something that used to be its own advice point, but we are specifically looking for an evaluation of the potential cumulative risk from the 3.37 million gallons that have been tallied up as still being in the interstitial liquid and leakable. We want to understand what that potential total risk is, because it's a pretty important input into how you make decisions about prevention and mitigation. We then get into timely response to tank leaks. And remember, originally we said timely assessment and response. We've now split it into assessment and communication up here, and now response down here. But this is language that was in the previous advice. Is there anybody who wants to chime in on where we've been so far before I move on?
Richard Bloom.
Hey,
And
I
then
jumped.
Chris.
I'm on the computer now. I think what you added to the first bullet, the roll up to where you were, the best way to mitigate. Yeah, I'm thinking we should come back to is the best way to mitigate a leak is prevent it in the first place type of approach.
Yeah, which is basically what we say here. And so it's right. Do we want to say it again in different words? I could take or leave it, but if it's important,
well, I'm talking what you added. The best way to prepare for future leaks is prevent them. I was just thinking to address future leaks rather than prepare for. That was my only point. Mitigate future leaks is prevent them. Okay.
And then I saw a comment from Susan Coleman about this bullet not being grammatically consistent with the others. Yeah, that's fair. Let's see here. Yeah. Maybe it does belong on its own still. We just make it a separate statement like that. I see people are jumping in queue, but I can't keep track of it.
That's all right. I've got you. You do what you're doing, and then when you finish that, we'll go to Chris and Susan. Susan like that. I'm just grateful you're typing. I love it.
Who wants to jump in?
Okay, Chris, and then
I think it read well the first time. I don't think it needs modification. It was good.
Chris Sutton.
Yeah, Jeff, on point C, timely response to tank leaks, I'm wondering if the last sentence in F about the emergency response team, if that wouldn't actually fit better in C. So we want a timely response, and part of that response could be having the emergency response team respond. Just a thought.
Okay, let me play for just a second here. Does anyone, we'll go back to talking about 2B in just a second. Let's carry this one for just a moment. Does anybody have specific thoughts about that proposal here? So Chris, I put it in both places because I do think that if we're going to say they ought to have a team, we shouldn't neglect to acknowledge that that could have some budgetary implications.
Right.
We're fragmenting our conversation a little bit. We're talking about two different things at once. Let's finish talking about this one right here in front of us, and then we'll go back and we'll look at the final bullet of 2B again, because I think that was generating some conversation. So comments on C before we go back to B.
Let's check in with Jeff Lyon, and then I'll check with the rest of the queue. Jeff?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make a couple comments for clarification. And it's general, so we could go to the top. I'm sorry, I'm going to jump around just a little bit, but I think it's all related. So I would like to just kind of summarize what I've gathered from the conversation, what I read. When you say item 1, you know, that's what DOE is doing now. And so if you want something besides what they're doing, I think you should clarify what you want them to do. And if you're saying, I mean, if you say remove all liquids, including the interstitial, that means you're talking about something less than fully retrieving the tank. Is that correct? And then if you are, you know, how they, you know, I want to explain a little bit. They did do that in the past, and there is a significant, you know, a couple million gallons of liquid still remaining in the tanks. The reason the liquids is remaining there is because it's very, very difficult and expensive to get out. And they do, and you guys all noted that there was a liquid retrieval report that talked about some options. And so I think, you know, just clarifying exactly what you want or making it more clear, because timing wise and cost wise, it's important to DOE to hear from you guys on what you're thinking. And it is important for me too. I should be very honest. A lot of this is helping me or it's affecting me because I get more information about what you're expecting. And then I want to caution you on using the word emergency because DOE may have a different understanding of what an emergency is compared to what you think it means. And so I would suggest you clarify, I would just use caution using the word emergency. And just as a note, they did not think the leaking tank in AY102 was an emergency because it was secondary containment. And they've talked a little bit about the leak in B109 with respect to what Pam brought up earlier, that, you know, there's a lot of stuff already in the soil. Why should we worry about a little bit more? So that to them is not an emergency either. And so clarifying what you really want from that team is a little bit different than, yeah, proactive is much help. Thank you. That would be good for me. And then, I'm here. I'm sorry, just a general comment for consensus issues for me. I heard Pam speak up a little bit about priorities and costs, and that's what we hear from DOE as well. So as a state agency, we have regulations that we have to follow too. And it is a difficult situation. So kind of thinking about, what Pam was talking about and how the board, what that really means to the board or to this committee, I think is worthy of attention too, because DOE, has the theory is that DOE is going to retrieve all the tanks and treat all the waste. And the problem is you have all of this long-term corrosion and stuff. B109, just as a matter of note, B109 was not a leaking tank prior to this discovery. It was one of the tanks that had not leaked in the past. And so this is a new leaking tank. It's a new, if you check the Hanlon report or HNF 182 a year ago, it was not a leaking tank, and now it is a leaking tank. So that's new stuff. That's the first time it's ever happened on the site. And so I think I've downloaded kind of my thinking. And, I'm not trying to change your advice. I'm just telling you some concerns about what I see. And so just throw out a few cautions for you. And if there's some questions in the future, go ahead and ask them. I'm more than happy to answer.
At the risk of jumping the line, Jeff, you talk about it being difficult and expensive to get out that interstitial liquid. Do you think it's too difficult and too expensive to try the enhanced salt well pumping that was talked about in that report from a couple of years ago?
Now you're. I'll tell you my opinion, Jeff. No, I do not. I do not think it is too expensive myself. That isn't something that DOE. DOE has a different view on the stuff. But no, I don't think it's too expensive.
Has anyone given you a number of what it would cost? I didn't see it in that report, so I'm just curious.
No, no, it would cost millions of dollars. I'm sure of that. But, so you asked me if it was too expensive. No, I don't think it's too expensive. The price, I don't know what it is. They have a leaking tank and they have liquids in the tank, and your bullet one is addressing that issue. So I don't think it's too expensive. And I think that's an important thing for you guys to, maybe that's what you ask them. How much will it cost?
Thank you.
I guess I have to unmute myself, eh? Is there anyone on from DOE who can provide a DOE perspective on this particular question? Maybe not.
I don't see anybody, Ruth.
Okay, well, I just want to equal time, right? I've got 5 people in queue, so we've generated interest and ideas. Are you ready for the queue, Jeff?
Yeah, please. It's your show.
Susan Leckband and then Pam.
Thank you. The piece, mine is minor. The piece that Richard added, the best way to mitigate future leaks is to prevent them, is not advice. That piece, I think, should be the first sentence at the top of this letter. But I have no objection to it being there, but for me, that goes. But so whatever anybody else wants to do is fine. And I like it. It's clean, to the point, but it's really not advice. Thanks.
All right. Pam, you had a comment earlier about liking something the way it was. Do you need to weigh in here?
Well, I liked the number 1 the way it was. And I just want to remind people, we're not going to get any more money from Congress than we're getting right now. So what you're asking for means they've got to quit doing something else. So why don't you tell us what you think they should quit doing? Because I mean, you can't get more money, and it may not be the world's best solution, but we worked really hard on this advice to identify the concerns and identify some possibilities, pursue technology, things like that. Now you're going back to where it was when it came out of committee in December. And I just telling you, I don't think you're going to get consensus in taking an aggressive position and telling DOE to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on something that is not in comparison to what they're working on in other places on the site. Thank you.
All right. Bob.
You know, it's been so long. Oh, I was going to also comment on the word emergency. So it's been addressed. Thank you.
Okay, Richard.
Well, I guess I reflect on what Jeff Lyons' comments came back of it being that possibly in number one, we are overstating or, you know, to remove all liquids is means you have to take the solids with it. And so possibly we would just delete the words all. Because we're talking about enhanced salt well pumping won't get all liquids. The historic means of disposing of the liquid has more freestanding. Well, no, I don't think we need it. We're talking about the liquids that are available, practicable. But the well, I mean, you know, if we're being able to detect a leak, we must be able to detect the liquid level. And I disagree that AY B109 wasn't a leaker before because the levels were increasing. There was water leaking into it. It's just simply for some reason it started leaking out. So the board believes the editors should remove liquid. I would just go back to the original wording, but take the word all out. As, and maybe add as practical. And just take the word all out. Yeah. Yeah, you're concerned whether it's practical or possible.
Yeah, we can change possible to practical. That's a policy level decision that we can work through.
Right.
My worry is, well, it's not practical, so we're going to take no action. And I would like a little more push than that.
Okay, well then possible, but what I would, it's something we don't have in here, which we've sort of downgraded with the technology bullet down below, or I think it's D, is that, we have TSCR, we have groutability. It's most of the cost of, having been involved in the AY102 retrieval, most of the cost in the planning is just simply transferring the waste. If we don't have to transfer the waste from the farm, the actual insertion of something into the tank and sucking it up into something and trucking it away is not that technically challenging. And we've seen development of technologies that really make that more practical, much like a sampling truck. So again, yeah, I don't know whether you want to bring that whole paragraph up under one.
I like the cleanness of one. I'll just speak for myself.
I do too. I do too. But maybe we clarify by saying just take the word all out. I don't know if that's what queued up Jeff Lyons' comment, but I'll leave it at that.
Got a couple folks in queue. Esteban, what's on your mind?
Yes, I think glad that this was brought up about what's considered emergency, right? And I think what Pam said, and I think about having the process started, getting money for Congress, and how I think we all have the self-awareness. It's a bureaucratic process, but yet being conscious that if the work's getting done in the technology, then when you're trying to communicate this to the public, like when we're, if you communicate this to our native communities, they're going to have a different perspective of what's considered emergency, of what like Rob said about, speaking maybe, to a different community, even now the Spanish speaking community, what's considered an emergency, right? And I think having the conversations with public people that, out here in the area learning more about it, that I think that's a big process, right? What's considered an emergency and what's going to continue the process of the cleanup, right? Because everybody has its own definition. I think that's where, in this advice, I think that the HAB's offering, and it takes, and then, yeah, appreciate all the work, but yeah, how's that, being communicated to the public and the wording? Because at the end, do we want to get too bogged down on the wording and the process, or which I think it says what affect, I think Pam, or no, who was it, affects the policy, but then, exactly like what, because everybody's going to have a different perspective, but at the end, how is it going to affect the actual work happening with everything, right?
Jerry, I've got you next in queue.
I appreciate that you put me next. I put in my comments in the chat if people look at it. In particular, quoting an ecology document from July 19th, 2021 about double shell tank leak response, which is just amazingly similar. When I received this last week, or less than a week ago, I think, and read Ecology's letter to Energy about this, it's just like so parallel to our advice. It's just phenomenal. It was written in regard to DST, not SSTs, but it's totally applicable. The regulations require leak response within 24 hours or as soon as practicable. Nowhere is that sense of urgency reflected in the LRP. That's their plan, leak retrieval plan, response plan. This does not meet the regulatory requirements. There should be a draft leak response work plan already written for every double shell tank that looks at where waste would be transferred, how it would be transferred, what the equipment would be used, where that equipment is located, and maintenance records for that equipment showing it is ready for use. It's just amazing how parallel what we're developing in advice, it turns out to be to comments that Ecology sent on double shell plan. And I just want to point that out, along with in terms of the dollars, that it's been repeatedly said and acknowledged that if and Permafix and other has also said, you know, you can use, they could use B109 waste for TBI, and the money could be used for it without any additional appropriation because it's already appropriated in there and the equipment is available, with a very minor change to the equipment, which is basically extending the equipment rather than shortening it. So I just want to point that out while I'm on with you.
So I will confess, Jerry, when people put stuff, content in the queue, I often will put whoever typed it in the queue, because if we have 6 or 7 folks on the phone, they actually can't read that. So that's why I put people in queue.
Thank you for, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I don't want to disenfranchise folks who are on the phone. So I should have explained that.
No, that's a great point.
Richard, I've got you next up.
I just want to respond to part of what Gary just said. The issue with AY 102 was the previous leak plan based on history at Savannah River. Double shell tank leaks were typically sidewall leaks. It was never expected that the bottom of the tank would start leaking. And so there was a leak plan. There was a plan basically to manage the leak until you could pump it away. But obviously that whole approach, when you have a bunch of single shell tanks and piping that doesn't really go anywhere from a lot of them, isn't going to happen. You know, the single shell tanks are non-conforming tanks. It's hard to have a plan when they were never designed to have a plan. So just a little trivia. There was a leak response plan and equipment. Questionable whether it was workable, but it was all on the assumption of a sidewall leak on the tanks.
Okay, Jeff. Is there anyone on the phone that wants to jump in? So Jeff, did we get down to D yet? I'm looking at the time and I'm looking at the advice, and this is the prize for this meeting, folks. To go, no go as to whether to send it to the full board. So.
Right. We have a couple of things we need to pick up and decide on. I've heard multiple opinions about this sentence and whether it belongs and where it belongs that we need to sort out. I've heard moving it up into the background. I still wonder whether we need it, but I'm okay having it be somewhere if it's an important statement to make. And then we have an existing question on the proper format and location for this point. I don't think anyone is disagreeing with the point. It's just a matter of how do we properly write it. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I was making some edits as people were talking about this idea of an emergency response team versus just a team that is equipped and trained. And so I made some changes there. And if people disagree with that, please chime in. So this says the board sees value in having a team that is equipped and trained to proactively remove SST liquids and respond to emerging leaks. And then down in the budget, I refer to it as a proactive response team.
Okay.
So that we need to mop up the things I just talked about, and then we can move on to D.
Okay, so Liz was back on that first sentence.
Okay.
The should it be in here and should it be here or in the background? If it went in the background, what is your best suggestion as to where that would be? And Rob, I've got you in queue.
I don't necessarily have a suggestion, but I was just wondering if we could look at where it might go. Maybe, can you scroll up I'm wondering if it might work in the first paragraph. Maybe not. Yeah.
I thought it would fit on the last paragraph, the last line. Just before it says the need for a plan is urgent. If we were to move that sentence, right there.
That looks good to me.
Rob, are you on this one? I know that was part of your concern earlier.
Well, I guess I think that we put a lot of effort into this, and we're fine tuning it. I'm okay with that is. I guess I just want to make sure that that the idea is not so much that. So we understand the complexity of the site is that you're not going to have a double trained team to go off and tweak valves and move things in the tank farms. You have to exercise the people they have in emergency response plan method. And so that's what we're really asking for is they put these things on paper, they plan it. Who are you going to call? Who, where's this at? Where's that at? Who do we talk in our permitting space? What do we got to do? Where, and then how do we have a communication tree to everybody that needs to know about this leak? I mean, that's kind of what, in our context, in our board, in our IM meetings, we were thinking like it's having it on paper established ahead of time and maybe having a few people trained to know where to go to get the manual when they do have the leak, because they're going to happen. And we just didn't appreciate a lot of how it was delivered to us. It was, nobody would admit to it. There's all kinds of debates with Jerry's people and et cetera on what gamma ray detectors meant and that sort of thing. And we want to avoid that all. We want a plan and we want a communication tree and all that and all the stuff you would normally get. People, I can understand people not thinking the word emergency is appropriate. Okay, but anyway, it's just that, is my thoughts coming across? I think that we need to have it on paper. That's what we need. It's a plan. Thank you.
Jeff Lyon, can you help here?
Yeah, I appreciate I don't know who it was that said it, but I appreciate what he's saying. And the thing that I think for me that isn't being addressed is, if you're going to have a team that's going to respond, they need to have the response equipment and the response plan. And that goes back to the question that Jeff Burright asked me about, do I know how much it costs and do I think it's too expensive? I think this letter could help clarify whether or not you're expecting them to invest some money in this project, because Pam makes a good point. The DOE has that perspective that they aren't getting any more money, but what's important to the board is what you're trying to express. So if you say they have a team, then you should say you should just elaborate a little bit more and say they need to have the equipment and they need to be prepared to respond in a specific way. And I think that would help clarify that issue. Over. Because it's going to, I want to reemphasize, it's going to cost money to buy equipment and be prepared for a leak. And they have to have a method of doing it. And right now, they don't have a method of doing it, especially in the tank farms that are remote. And, they can always respond to a leak in the A and AX farm because they got all the infrastructure in place. But the other farms are much more difficult, and they need to invest some time and money in getting prepared if they're going to respond to it in a timely manner. The second option is just wait till they retrieve the tanks, and that's kind of where DOE is at right now.
I've got Bob and Richard in queue. Bob?
Where Jeff was. on the type of team, I think I like the word proactive, and if he would use that word on both, yeah, to a proactive response team instead of, yeah. Okay, that's good. Okay.
Richard? Richard?
I just want to expand a little bit. I think Jeff Lyons has expressed the reality of life is the ability to respond to these leaks in the farms is pretty minimal. I remember one leak. I don't remember. Jeff would probably remember the name of it, but one of the farms, the response was to go out there and put an exhauster on it, see if they could draw enough air out that it would evaporate the liquid that was in the tank, and therefore, assuming it evaporated, it didn't leak. But that still took months to permit a exhauster and find one that they could move. And exhausting the liquid on the top of the tank basically means you're moving what you can back into a salt farm. I just that's what we're asking for, is an ability to respond. They have no ability, no equipment practical to use. So that's the point of the ask, is get equipment that will, enhance salt well pumping and Tisker technology.
Okay. And Jeff Lyon has typed in the chat for those on the phone, from ecology's perspective, the exhauster did not effectively stop the leak.
I totally agree.
So I've got Chris Sutton in queue. Chris. We'll get you off of mute and we'll hear you.
Yep.
There you go.
I'm thinking that with regard to Jeff's comments about equipment and Pam's about cost and budget, that maybe we could move on to D, because D kind of addresses both of those items in a way. And I think there's likely to be some comments and thoughts on D. And E kind of goes into it a little bit too, at least about developing new technologies, and that kind of plays into the equipment part. But I think there's room elsewhere in the advice to maybe clarify or discuss further these concerns.
Okay. Jeff, all right. Do you want to go there, or do you want to clean up the last couple of things that on your list before we go to D?
I would like to make sure that we've cleaned up all before we get there, because that was where we were going next.
Okay.
If nobody objects, I've moved this statement about the best way to mitigate future leaks is to prevent them into the background right before we get into the advice. We still need to sort out the proper format for this discussion of looking at the risk, the cumulative risk of all the leakable interstitial liquid. I'm absolutely open to suggestion there.
So basically, where should those two sentences go?
And we're under assessment and communication of tank leaks right now, which is under the umbrella of developing a single shell leak mitigation plan.
So do those two sentences belong under 2, or do they belong elsewhere? The plan should specifically evaluate the potential cumulative risk from 3.37 million gallons of interstitial liquids. Where should that go? Oh, or
If we're talking about this being one of these things is not like the other, maybe the simplest way is to just make it look like the others.
right, which was the original comment from Susan Coleman of making it congruent with that list.
Well, now I've screwed up all my formatting.
Oh, I can't tell you how often I do that and how patient Josh is with me. So while Jeff is wrestling with format, Richard, you're in queue.
I was just going to come back and say I liked it the way it was, even if it was not totally consistent. Just call include an evaluation, something like that. But it should be. We are giving examples. I don't think we should ask. I mean, the big ask here is get some capability. Don't study what the effects are. But the plan should have, should be based on an assessment of assumed risk, and leaking 3.37 million gallons of interstitial liquids is going to be a new wave down in the future, 10 years from now when it all gets out. So I think just leave it under 2. I don't think we should ask for another. I think DOE will have to do that indirectly in order to justify the costs, but doing nothing is just not the right way of going.
Jeff, the original comment was one of parallel sentence construction, not necessarily one of this thing needs to belong elsewhere. So I think what you've done responds to that comment. And Susan Coleman, being the shy, retiring, bashful person, would tell me if that was wrong. Right, Susan?
So we would just add it as another item on that bulletin list as
Right.
Jeff has reworded it.
Correct. Jeff, what was the other loose end that needed? Thank you, Susan.
I can't recall. If people are okay with how C is worded, then I say let's move on to D, but let's just make sure everyone's okay with C before we roll past it. Are we going till 4 or 3, by the way?
The original plan was a break at 3 o'clock and then membership packet and committee business. My suggestion is that this is the most important thing you're working on. So the question would be, do you want to take a break or do you want to keep going? I would worry about going longer than 2 hours without a break. But that's just because I worry about that stuff. Bob?
I think we could continue on. We could maybe cut into our committee business time if we need to. And I know Gary's talked to the membership packet for the last 3 days, so he could probably take a break there too if we need to.
Yeah, I'm willing to cede time to allow you to finish your business. So Bob, yeah, you're right on target there.
Great. So the question on the table is, are people okay with C, the wording in C? it adds the sentence about the value of having a team to proactively remove SST liquids and respond to emerging leaks. So not using the word emergency, using words like proactive and emerging.
Looks good.
My suggestion is we go on to D.
Okay. D is specific to assessing the feasibility of abatement technologies. This is an acknowledgement that whatever actions are talked about in the plan are accompanied by some realistic looks at what it takes to implement those actions.
Don't have anybody in queue.
Okay. Related but separate topic. We specifically talk about, this is all of it here, developing abatement technologies. This is the let's have more tools in our tool belt advice point. We talk about having, moving forward with what's practicable and timely while leaving room for innovation. We advise DOE to invest in and support technologies to proactively mitigate leaks or to mitigate the spread into the vadose zone once they have leaked. We then get more specific, and this is some of the discussions that we've had in past meetings where we are interested to see if there is a combination of either available now or not far off the horizon, some things that we might be able to link together to have some new options for how to address these interstitial liquids specifically. We also do explicitly support a pilot test of the enhanced salt well pumping that was, tied for first place in this study that came out in 2020 of options for interstitial liquid. So all things that we've talked about before, and something that we include here.
Anyone on the phone with comments? I don't have anybody in queue. I want to make sure we hear from folks on the phone if we need to.
Okay, Steve says looks good. We can roll back if we need to. I'm going to assume that no one needs me to stay there, so I'm going to scroll down to our final point. Allocate budget for managing SST leaks. This was in our December advice previously. The only addition, I believe, is this idea of acknowledging that we talk about seeing the value of having a team that is able to proactively mitigate and respond. And we're just acknowledging here that, and please feel free, if I didn't write it right, let's change it. Just acknowledging that this team we're talking about would need its own budget item.
I have Liz in queue.
This is more a thing that may have already been mentioned, and I apologize if I missed it in the budget advice, which I've heard like 4 times this week. Do we mention this in our budget advice for cleanup priorities? Because if we don't, we should be consistent, and I just can't remember.
Let me pull it up.
And it's something we can look at later, and I think Chris is still on. I mean, a bunch of us will be on tomorrow. I can try to remember too, but just came up in my head. I was like, I want to make sure we're consistent, but I like it as written. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, there are at least 2 comments in the markup for the budget advice to go back and make sure things are consistent across the 2 pieces. So note to self, there's more than one.
Yeah, TWC and D both talk about the plan that we're talking about here, and then leaking single shell tanks, and we need to look at it, the budget advice, to make sure it's consistent with what we put out here.
So yeah, so that's been flagged. Jerry, you got your hand up.
I just want to.
Jerry, can you hug your mic a little bit closer so we can hear you?
I want to make sure we understand it. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good.
As I pointed out, Ecology sent a regulatory document about double shell tank leak response, saying you need to have a plan that lays out the equipment, the testing for the equipment, all the things that essentially are in this device here. I think it would behoove us to say that the budget should include funding for the regulatorily required leak response plans that include equipment and teams for both DST and SST. They're related, and if we're saying it's as if SST equipment and a plan is somehow different than the regulatory requirement for SST, where we haven't said you got to have budget and a plan, but Ecology has said you got to do budget. You're going to have a plan with equipment as a regulatory requirement. And if it's regulatory requirement there and it's regulatory requirement here, it shouldn't be like, oh, only here do you need to have a budget.
So do you have, so you're talking about F. Do you have specific words you want to put
Well,
in?
I think maybe development and maintenance of SST and DST leak mitigation and abatement as to meet regulatory requirements. This is driving home that this is not just something we've invented here. Excuse me.
Jeff Lyon, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to, it's kind of along what Jerry was talking about, but not perfectly. I was just looking at all the bullets and how you were talking about these things. And, I noticed in item 1, you actually mention SSTs. Item 2, you don't mention SSTs. And then a little bit later, I think, 2B says tank leaks, and C says tank leaks. And then you don't say anything about tanks in D and E, and then you say SST leaks in F. And so I can infer what you mean, but I think it would be best if you cleared up what you meant. Oh, thank you for highlighting that. So that takes care of that one. I think you covered the whole set of bullets after that then. Great. Sorry about that. I spaced out. So thanks.
So back to F, Jeff Burright, I think you added to meet regulatory requirements, the end of that first sentence, also in response to Jerry's comments.
And my point would be that it covers, you have to do the same for both DST and SST here. So this is a case where F would be allocate budget for managing tank leaks. And that it addresses both of them. I mean, Jeff, isn't that what Jeff Lyons, wouldn't that be consistent with what ecology wrote about the DST leak plan?
Yeah, that's the regs you're quoting, and the regs apply to both systems, especially when they're permitted, but even in the interim status. So yes.
Thanks.
So from an advice perspective, is F just focused on SST leaks, or is it tank leaks? All of the above?
I'm suggesting that F be tank leaks, not SST.
Got
So,
folks in queue.
right, then you've got both spots there. Thanks. Yeah.
I have Chris, Susan Leckband, and Richard. Chris?
Yes, this is kind of in response to Liz's and Bob's comments on the work priority advice and this one. And I guess Bob and Jeff and Ruth, could you be sure that Tom Galeotto and myself get a version of this, a marked up version of this advice when we quit tonight? Because Tom was planning on going over the budget advice at 9:15 tomorrow morning. And it'd be very handy if we had this with the markups on it, so that we could incorporate the exact wording in a couple of the items in that work priority advice tomorrow.
Sure.
Right. Susan Leckband and then Richard.
When this started out, it was about SST tank leaks. Clearly now, if we're going to talk about, we need to determine whether this is going to be, we change everything universally to tank leaks, or, you know, this is confusing to me. And I don't mind changing it to tank leaks. That really is a high policy level. I get that. But we need to determine whether that's the direction you want to go. Taking out SST in one point and leaving it in other places and stuff like that. It's kind of confusing. Also, I got a little heartburn with telling them this to allocate blah, 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 leak mitigation and abatement to meet regulatory requirements. We are not a regulatory board. So I have a little heartburn with that. So I'm not going to object to it being there, and I understand why you'd want to put it there. But I don't want the board to get into trouble, as we sometimes have in the past, for presuming that we are a regulator. So the way it's interpreted, that's all. I'm, I don't disagree with the point. I just sometimes words matter, but I do think we need to determine whether or not this is going to be advice encouraging this team for all tank leaks or just SST, because this is really starting to get messy to me. Thanks.
Richard, are you speaking to this or a slightly different?
I'm speaking to that. I disagree with adding the regulatory requirements, because as I've stated in the past, these tanks inherently don't meet regulatory requirements. Therefore, they're under a compliance agreement. I mean, they don't have secondary containment. They don't have, it's a negotiated approach, and to say you have a regulatory, you can choose which regulatory requirements the HAB would pick and choose is outside of the scope of the HAB. So it doesn't add anything to this, to the statement. It actually detracts and may inflame. So overall, personally, the single shell tanks were not permittable. That's why there'll never be a Part B for them. They're interim status tanks waiting for closure. They are what they are. It's a question of let's protect the environment and get the liquids that we can out of them. Thank you.
All right, Bob and then Jerry. Bob?
Let Gary go first.
Oh, Jerry?
I'm not on. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Jerry and then Bob.
Thanks. I just
hug that mic, Jerry, so we can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry. It'd be okay to leave out the regulatory requirements. Richard's right that it's required. So saying it is not necessary as long as we understand it. On Susan's point, what I want to respond to is I was looking at this, and I think this is actually a unique one item that applies to both because of outstanding work, that ecology has put out and said, hey, you need to do this for double shell tanks. Turns out the same exact types of requirements they're saying. And so I think is one case in the entire list of advice that when I looked at it, I felt like it should be tank leaks, not just SSTs. But I wouldn't fall on my sword if it said just SSTs, if you felt like that's how you do it consistently, as long as when we present the advice, it's clear that this is something that would be required for and is expected for both DSTs and SSTs.
The title. So the question is it okay for the purposes of the advice as slightly different than the understanding of the context for the advice, that where Jeff replaced SST with tank under F, are you all okay leaving it as SST in item F?
I guess I would leave it as tank leaks, because if they're going for a budget item, you don't know which tank's going to leak first. You just ask for money to address leaks in tanks. So I think we could leave it as tank leaks for this item.
Okay. Richard?
I'll unmute first. Actually, if we take, this is the only place we put SST in. This is all under the 2 where you've added SSTs. Putting it tanks is fine because, going back to AY 102, when you had that little bit in the bottom of the double shell tank, outer shell, this technology would be much more amenable to be used than the current leak plan, which would be to put the big pump into the tank and pump it back into the tank, which is the current double shell tank leak approach. So taking SST out of here doesn't change the focus of it being on the SSTs. I think DOE would argue that they have a dedicated plan for SST leak response and a team that would implement that plan. It's just simply that plan would not get the remaining little bit of liquid out of the outer shell of the tanks, which is what was done for AY 102, by the way.
Susan, can you live with F with the word tank in it instead of SST?
Of course, Absolutely.
For new folks, welcome to the sausage factory. Chris, you're next up. Chris?
I think you need to, I agree with Susan. I think SST versus tank is going to get messy. If you go down to the appendix, the supporting background context, the entire appendix uses SST, and in particular SSTB 109 as part of the background. So if you go to tanks and make it universal, then you got some, I think, some inconsistency with the entire appendix, which uses SST everywhere.
Okay, so is your suggestion then that you keep SST in item F?
I think you got to be consistent in the whole advice. And if you're using SST in the appendix, then I think you gotta use it everywhere. You're consistent. If you're gonna use tank in a more universal context, then I think you're gonna have to change the appendix somewhat.
Okay.
It's just a matter of consistency from top to bottom.
Okay. Bob, are we looking at getting consensus on the appendix, or has the appendix become more like the congressional record of this is how we got here?
I think we're only looking at the background and the advice. The appendix is an appendix. It's just like Jeff put on there. It contains information that supported the development of the advice. And I think we leave it on there as we take this to the board. But the board needs to decide if we want to leave it on there when we send the advice on, because it's good information, but it's not really part of the advice.
Okay. All right. So the question that y'all are going to have to answer is for F, do you want it to say SST or tank? Rob, I've got you in queue.
Yeah, I think that we need to keep it focused on this single shell. Remember that the single shell tanks are managed differently than the double shell tanks. Different teams, different people, different budgets, the whole thing. And so the single shell tank leak is what we're concerned about. That's the title of this advice. And so we should really make sure we're focused on that. Right, and I support leaving single shell tank there. I also support sprinkling in the word radioactive waste all throughout this report. so we get somebody's attention. Thank you.
Just a light dusting, huh?
A light dusting of radioactive waste. Richard.
I might jump back in for consistency. I mean, F's the only one we put SST in. If we want to keep it, we put SST in the upper header number 2, right? And so if we want to have SST sprinkled throughout, well, then you have to sprinkle it into B and C and D. I mean, go one way or the other. I don't really care, but I saw no reason. We've sort of put this under an SST header just for clarification. So either way, just be consistent. Don't we used tanks before, so Jeff, you use your magic. I just want to point that out.
I am hearing a desire to just have it say SST in item number F, which might be item number 3 now.
Okay, good.
If that is the case, then you have successfully gone paragraph by paragraph, made some sausage, come up with some agreements. For the new folks, going back to Susan Leckband's suggestion earlier, the way the process works is there's actually 3 levels of agreement. There's the issue manager team who drafts the draft advice and comes to agreement to send it to the committee. The committee then comes to agreement, consensus if you will, on a draft to send to the full board. And then the full board has the opportunity to have consensus on actually adopting the advice and sending it to the tri-party agreement agencies. So literally, there's a lot of agreement and consensus building that goes into the sausage that the board makes. So the question before you is this piece of draft advice ready to forward to the full board for its consideration? Meaning there's consensus within this committee to send it forward. Don't crack me up. Black man, what kind of sausage is it?
I think one other thing, Ruth, is usually once you agree in IM or committee, you have to support the advice. You can't change your mind and take another viewpoint at the board meeting. So you got to speak now or hold your peace.
So when I teach consensus, I have a 3-part thing. The first is I understand it, because you shouldn't agree to anything you don't understand. 2, I can live with it. And 3, I will support it. That's the corollary to what Bob just said. And that's the gentle person's agreement at the HAB. Susan Leckband.
Thank you. And just as a little reminder as well, the beginning of this advice started with the work plan and at the committee level. Then the committee determines, yes, we believe the board ought to speak on this. So we're going to create an IM team within that particular sponsoring committee. And anybody on the committee can be and should be on that team. And everybody goes into this with noble intent. It isn't as if we're going in, I'm going to say, you can't put that in. And it is the struggle to reach consensus, understanding and respecting the different viewpoints. There are many of us who aren't technical. I'm one of them. Even though I worked on the site for a lot of years, I'm not an engineer. And so I'm the person that tries to take engineer geek speak and put it into words real people can understand, and to keep it as short and clear as possible. And then we have wonderful technical people and people who say, okay, I don't understand this, and everybody's voice has the same value. I want you all to understand that, and we appreciate it. And there isn't any question that is stupid. There just isn't. We all need to understand what we're signing up to, because when this goes forward, we've all said, okay, we agree, this meets our values as a board, as representatives of the organization that we represent. And we've gone into this discussion with noble intent to work toward consensus. And this was a wonderful example of how that can be successful. So, well, like Dolly Parton says, come down off the cross, somebody needs the wood. I'll stop talking. But I do want everybody to know that the new folks, that we appreciate it and ask questions, and this is the best part of what happens. And sometimes it's a little tiresome, but it is so worth it and so worthy that we come to this conclusion. That being said, I vote it goes forward to the board. Thank you.
So do we have any,
Chris,
Chris,
move it forward.
do we have anybody that objects to this moving forward? Oh, Steve Anderson. Oh, yes. Okay, got it. I didn't word that question very well, did I?
right. Folks on the phone, are you okay moving it forward? We're down to 3. We've whittled the phone down.
I support this as written.
Okay.
So Jeff, we're right. If you would send this to Tom Galeotto and Chris Sutton so they can see it before tomorrow's BCC meeting, and also to Josh and myself, because we need to clean it up to send it out to the full board.
Will do.
Thank you for editing while we worked through it. That's a real luxury, and I love it.
And thank you, Jeff. You did a great job.
Good conversation. Thank you.
So, do you think we need a break, Ruth, or do we just want to jump in to Gary?
I think, well, we've got 30 minutes. It's up to the committee to whether they need to take a lap around the living room or not. So we have membership packet and committee business and 30 minutes to be brilliant.
So, Gary, let's turn it over to you, and maybe you can talk fast.
Well, good afternoon, folks, and good job on working on the advice. We look forward to seeing what happens at the end. Instead of me going into a lot of the background on membership changes, I've gone through this during the last 2 committee days. We've had those who also attend EIC meetings, and then those who also attended the January 19th meeting. We've gone over this several times. So with the interest of time, why don't we just do a Q&A, and I will answer questions as we go along to be respectful of the time, and hopefully we've got some time left over for committee business.
Are there questions for Gary on the membership packet? Anyone?
Yes, I have some questions. Over the last several days, Gary laid out the logic for a lot of the things that they're doing, like no alternates for the public at large, things like that. I was just wondering, Gary, have you written all this down? Because a couple years from now, when you have moved on, and it's like you said, it's going to take a long time to institute all these changes. Is there a document or something that whoever replaces you or has the actions to do that they can refer back to? Also, I think the board would love to see a written document that says these are the reasons we're doing what we're doing, and this is how we're going to do it. So, question.
Well, we don't have a document yet, and that is good, because I am moving this on to the next person who sits in this seat, whether I move on my own accord or somebody decides it's time for me to move along. Yes, that's knowledge and information that should be passed along, and that is something that we're working on internally. As far as so yes, we're making sure that this is memorialized as we go forward.
So I guess I would request that the board be allowed to participate and maybe discuss some of the options with you as you go ahead and do that.
And we'll also likely put it into the procedures manual as we update that as well.
Okay.
Susan Leckman?
Okay, had to find my microphone. I'm curious, since this board is obviously unique and it came into existence prior to the other boards and has a different foundation in that this board advises 3 agencies, not just the Department of Energy. Can we assume that as these changes move forward, that it is done in concert with the regulating agencies as part of the recipients of the advice from this board, and that it, I believe, is codified in the tri-party agreement?
Yes. We have been talking with ecology and EPA throughout this to get their feelings, address their questions, understand their concerns. This is not being done in a DOE vacuum.
Do they have any input? When you say talking with, is it talking to, or do they have any input into these changes?
We have accepted input.
Okay.
So it's a conversation.
All right. Thank you.
I am going to, Chris, with your permission, I'm going to have Ryan Miller jump the line as one of the reps from ecology. I don't think we have anybody from EPA here, but Ryan, I saw your hand.
Yeah, can you come back to me in a minute?
Okay, I will come back to you in a minute. I've got Chris and then Jerry. Chris Sutton. Let's get you off of mute, Chris. Oh dear. Chris, we've got you frozen up.
Okay.
There you are.
Gary, yesterday at the RAP meeting, you gave a schedule for people whose tenures are expiring and want to reapply, and new people who want to reapply. They need to get applications to you by such and such a date, and so on. And you emphasize that a couple times, and maybe you could give that for people at the on this committee so they can hear it if they haven't already.
Yes, Chris, good question. There are some folks that we have already reached out to that are in positions like we've got a couple of our public at large that we are just renewing. Some of our non-union, non-management folks. We're asking to get their applications in by the end of this week. That way we can go on and get those processed and getting queued up. The other folks who we're going to be reaching out to starting now and into next week, we need to get those applications in by the end of the month or so. My goal is to be able to get the package ready to send to headquarters in the first week or 2 of March in order to have a chance of getting this approved by October. The further we go into March to get the packet submitted, the further into the year we're looking at for approval. And you know that every year we have this train wreck of packets not being approved in a timely manner. And yes, that's my term. And I want to avoid that. This is an emotional process anyway, emotional changes. And I want to try to mitigate that as much as possible. And hope that we can get this thing moving forward. If we need to delay it, then we're looking at possibly not even getting the packet approved until toward the end of the year. So there's kind of a trade-off there. if it turns out we're going to be holding, to give people a bit more time to for input, then that's what we'll do. Knowing that we're looking at a closer to the end of year approval.
I have Jerry, Ryan, and Richard. Jerry?
So Gary, I haven't received any packet or a single thing in writing from the department on behalf of Heart of America Northwest. And I'm wondering what is going to be in these packets for organizational seats, and will it include a discussion of criteria that you're applying? It's been unclear to me if you're applying diversity to seats or to individuals, what the criteria is, how it'll be applied, and how, if an organization was to attempt to want to recruit someone new to meet criteria in this packet, how they would have time to do so, or if they were, as I understood from the prior presentations, if there are seats that we might recruit for, which we haven't been informed. In other words, an entire regional environmental group, for example, which we might recruit and add diversity to the whole board for, what that process is and how long we would have and what the criteria is for them. Is that all going to be in writing ever, anywhere? And is it going to come to us in a week?
Jerry, I appreciate your question, and you should be receiving your packet as well as other organizations within the next couple of weeks. We are wrapping up writing an information sheet, basically to answer a lot of the questions that you're asking. There is an open seat on the board for an environmental organization. I think I've said this a few times over the past few weeks. Hanford Watch, when that organization folded a little more than a year or so ago, that seat has not been backfilled. So we're also looking for ideas, names of organizations that can be that can fill that in. If it looks like trying to recruit is something that you can't do in a couple of weeks, and we recognize that every group is different, and we need to hold submission another couple of weeks or so. I'm willing to do that. Like I said, the flip side to that is for every week that I hold the packet, that's another week or longer on the back end. And I want to do this as right as we possibly can, and go forward with that. So I hope that answers your question, Jerry.
Well, I'm not sure it does. For last year, I asked about recruiting for that seat and actually had conversations with other environmental groups, but there was no defined answer ever about what we would do. And so I'd like to see in writing put out to the whole board and public what that criteria is. And it can't just go to organizations in their renewal packet. It needs to go to everyone. What the process is for nominating someone and criteria for filling that seat or any other seat. And then for what we need to, if what you are looking for in terms of process for an existing seat. So at this point in time, for example, I have no idea with your age criteria that was put out for just an hypothetical, how that applies to, does it apply to an alternate or both seats, or what else it would apply, or how it would apply? Does it apply to all 5 regional environmental seats? Does it apply to a subset of the board. What in the world does it apply to? And how will it be considered? And the same for racial diversity and every other aspect of what you're looking for. And frankly, this will need time. You laid this out in December and haven't seen anything in writing other than a slide that didn't have any of the information. So my request would be to put together that information, share it out, and we'll, you know, if it requires us to examine criteria and look at recruitment and coordination amongst multiple entities within a category, that's going to take a month at least.
I appreciate your comments, Jerry. And yes, we recognize that this is going to take us a little bit of time to get through. And we're going to do the best that we can to get this packet as right as we can. But this is going to be a continuing conversation going forward. The diversity criteria is going to be applied across the board. Every seat is subject to term limits. We recognize that some of the governmental agencies will have some challenges because they may select from a certain pool. Say, for instance, a city council may have council members as folks that they choose to want to be on the board. So we've got to be flexible there. As far as criteria for the different organizations, there really isn't anything written in the memorandum of understanding on what that particular group should look like. You do make a good comment there, and I will re-examine if we can put together criteria of what an environmental group is or what we consider to be a civic organization. So I'll take that back for action and consideration, and I'll work with the tri-party agencies on there. And then your last
I would
point
out that we did have that the groups back in the charter, the groups for those 5 seats were to be nominated by the other groups within the category. But I raised this a year ago and never heard anything. You know, it's left us unable to recruit.
Yes, a year ago, I didn't have direction to fill that position. I do have that direction now. And yeah, if you've got a group that you want to nominate, let me know, and I'll be happy to work with them. Same thing with other folks. I know only so many groups myself, which is why an organization such as this is very helpful in the networking and the outreach that I can't do by myself alone or a small staff. So you're asking some great questions, Jerry, and I'm expecting an email or a phone call from groups wanting to know more, and we'll do what we can. So I appreciate it.
And what about on term limits? Does that apply to a primary and an alternate, or how does that work?
Term limits apply across the board. In fact, on the membership terms of applications, that is actually point number 1 is EMSSAB members. It does not distinguish between primary or alternate, are appointed for a 2-year term, and appointments may be renewed twice for a maximum period of service for 6 years. We had been granting exceptions to that over the years as kind of a matter of course. The White House just recently, this past year, said that the granting of exemptions is going to be few and far between. And it will primarily be within the HAB to the governmental agencies. I have not seen that policy in writing. It's something that I've been told that is what the White House is putting out. The diversity numbers are also based on what the population of the area is, and that's also being put out by an executive order that President Biden signed in June. So we're still working through a lot of this, and I'm learning as I go, Jerry.
Well, I guess number one is we don't expect you to be the person who's knowledgeable about environmental groups. That's why it was always envisioned that regional environmental groups would nominate regional environmental groups. The university systems would decide on universities, etc. And obviously, it's of concern to us that we don't see any reason why we would discriminate between governmental entities and anyone else on term limits. Not no logic to apply there that works for us. So we'll challenge that as we come to it.
Thank you.
I had hands up from Ryan and Richard, and I now don't have hands up from Ryan and Richard.
Hey, Ruth,
there you
sorry.
are.
Yeah, you already had me in the queue, so I just lowered my hand.
Okay.
So circling back to Susan's comment and Gary's response, thanks for giving me a chance to kind of gather some of my thoughts on this. So from ecology standpoint, we're participating in and we're tracking this conversation as it matures and continues, including the introduction of diversity efforts. That's important to both Washington and the federal administration and the agencies DOE and EPA. We do support diversity and environmental justice efforts. All that being said, we do continue to have concern over the potential loss of institutional knowledge. And we are interested in further developing the mentorship ideas suggested in previous discussions, kind of like David mentioned at the last HAB meeting, David Bowen. Regardless of term limits, this project is going to continue for decades and knowledgeable engagement is important. So I guess all that being said, and this part might be more from maybe kind of my standpoint, I don't think it's fair to say that ecology or EPA have really had an impact or say on these changes that came down from DOE involving term limits. We were told that these changes were coming, often several times at the last minute before some of these HAB meetings. I really don't think it's fair to say that we had an impact on saying whether that they would be implemented or not. They came from DOE. Like I said, we are participating in the conversation with DOE and in EPA, and we're sharing our opinions. But I don't think it's fair to say that we've really had an impact on these changes happening or not. Thank you.
Richard Bloom, do you still have your hand up?
Yes, I did. I just took it down because you put me on queue. The question for Gary. So if the packets are in, so will you submit them as a group or are you submitting them piecemeal?
They will be submitted as a group.
Okay, so as long as it's in before the end of the month, you're as good as it's going to get, right?
Well, the end of the month deadline may need to get pushed to the right some to allow folks to be able to get packets together. My goal is end of the month, but that may not be a realistic goal. Just going to do the best that we can.
Oh, okay. Get mine in. Bye.
Yeah, the sooner I get packets, the easier I can work on those. So appreciate it. Bob, hey, sorry for taking so much time.
Okay, thank you. And we are out of time, actually. I do have that we need to ask Ruth if she got enough votes to declare a winner.
I do. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 votes. And all of them agreed that Bob Suyama would be your chair and Susan Leckband would be your vice chair for 2022.
Thank you. The next thing on the agenda is committee business, and we don't have a lot of time, but Tom Cecilia has proposed a tank waste and a RAP joint meeting for our next committee week. And he and I are working through, he actually turned out a Venn diagram, man after my own heart, that shows the overlap between the two committees. And so I have a whole list of items that I need to continue working with Gary, trying to get them on our agenda. And I think if we can continue our discussion about having a SME or a DOE person come in for a conversation on direct feed law and all the things that have happened, that would be a good thing for us to do for the next meeting. And then I'll continue working with Tom and Gary to figure out if we can set up a joint meeting between the two technical committees. And so that's kind of what I think I'm going to leave the next meeting agenda on. We may need to have a committee call to finalize the agenda after we do some more conversations. So I guess I'd like to ask if anybody has a burning need for a urgent discussion on any topic that we can try to schedule for the next meeting. Just based on our committee work plan, which we worked so hard on, but we really haven't looked at that much. It lists a lot of topics and a lot of agreements on what DOE was going to brief us on. And so I think we could fall back to that also to say, oh, is something right? Is something ready? So, oh, she put it up.
You told me to have it.
I didn't think we had time to look at it, but yeah, there's a lot of
the front
there's
page.
a lot of topics there, and we haven't hit a lot of them. But you see under the direct feed law, critical path, all those. Here's my note. All those direct feed law items that I have on my list here, which would be the phase gate, the critical path, the status of the effluent management facility, the progress being made on the heater melt up, any status on the operation of TISCR. Those are all things that I think we haven't heard about and we should be brought up to date on. Also, there's the AX tank farms. They were doing AX 102 and 104, and they were moving into their third technology. And we were told that we could expect a briefing on the progress there. So, and then there's, I have a whole bunch of things that are still probably up in the air. If there's any more progress on the discussions on the single shell tank negotiations between DOE and ecology and the holistic negotiations, hopefully might even be moving forward there. So I think we have a full plate that we can ask DOE for, and we'll see what Gary's able to wrestle into being for the next meeting. So with that, any other? Oh, Rob says virtual tour. Now, they talked about that yesterday at the RAP meeting. I think Tom Cecilia was pushing for I think Gary called it wheels on the ground tour, but it didn't look like that might happen. So, Gary, can you talk to us anything about the virtual tour?
Actually, Bob, I had a conversation with the program manager who's overseeing our tours, and we've got a couple of ideas that we could spend an hour during the committee of the whole in May doing a good virtual tour there. It's not nearly as good as a windshield tour, which is what we'd really love to be able to do, and even better, we'd like to get to where we can take you into facilities. That's still a ways off, but we can do a about a 1 hour, hour and a half virtual tour at the and it was also suggested at potentially a committee meeting, or excuse me, a board meeting, and we could take an hour out of the committee of the whole to do that. Otherwise, we're looking at possibly June, which I think is the next time something like that's available. Our time for March is already filled. Does that sound like an idea?
Yeah. Okay, we'll carry that forward. All right. Any other items for the good of the group?
Bob, I'm in queue. I just wanted to bring up that the next report for the National Academy of Sciences study about supplemental low activity waste and grout versus glass, on-site versus off-site, that might hit the streets in April, and that would probably be a tight turnaround. But I wonder, would a member of the technical group, the FFRDC from Savannah River, or one of the PNNL people that we've had talk to us in the past, Tom Bruns or Matt Asmussen, there are also some DOE people who are working on it. If anybody would be willing to give the Tank Waste Committee the abbreviated book report of, you know, what it says, and because I think that they are going to be opening it up also for comment during that time, and so it would seem timely to make sure everyone is informed about what's in it. Just Gary mentioning committee of the whole makes me remember we need to have a conversation sooner rather than later about how we want to design that sucker to be a good conversation. So I hope that we do that.
Okay, we have more than enough for the next committee meeting. Okay, and I did note the committee of the whole. I think time is right for planning that. So can't remember who was the lead. I thought it was Susan.
Dan Solitz stepped in when the demands on Susan's time and energy grew.
Well, now that she's a celebrity, yeah, I can see that.
I have her autograph. But no, Dan Solitz has stepped in to shepherd.
Okay, great. All right. Anything else? We're 2 minutes past time. Great job, everybody. We'll look forward to having a full meeting next time. So
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks all. Bye.
Everybody stay well.